The sea god Himu created and blessed the country of Haeguk, inhabited by charming mermaids. However, from generation to generation, the Haeguk kings are born without a heart. Without a heart, one can only live for 25 years. If the king fails to take the heart of the girl who loves him by the age of 25, he will die. A year ago, a small boat with 2 white sails dropped anchor in a quiet harbor. The sun was already painting the edges of the horizon, and small waves were breaking against the edges of the boat. A gray-haired man in traditional clothes with large beads around his neck and a hat on his head noticed that it was already getting dark. He told Saul that she could walk slowly. The young girl, wearing woven sandals, carefully stepped onto the board that hung over the sea. The wind fluttered the dress and braid of the brunette, who stood uncertainly on the edge of the board. Saul swallowed nervously. The girl looked ahead with fear. The sea is so calm, but when you stand before it on the threshold of death, it seems ominous. The brunette's hands were shaking and nervously clutching the hem of her dress. The sun sank even lower, painting everything around her in golden colors. The wind picked up. Saul felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. She covered her face with her hands. The sound of the drums made the situation even more tense. Saying, "Mom, be healthy," the girl took a step forward. The board creaked under her foot. Taking another step, the brunette splashed into the water. Solu sank deeper and deeper into the abyss. The last air bubbles came out of her mouth. She realized that she was suffocating. Her blurred vision saw a shadow ahead. The dark spot was approaching. The girl saw 2 glowing beads of eyes in front of her. The brunette couldn't make out what was in front of her. It was hard to see, but for some reason that look seemed sad to her. Solu extended her hand towards the creature. It began to envelop her hand, moving further onto her body with its essence like vines. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She realized that he had grabbed the drowning man. Solu smiled at this kind cutie, but the creature let go of the girl and swam away. The brunette, sinking even deeper into the abyss, realized that now it was truly the end. As she slowly sank into oblivion, Solu heard music flowing with the words of a song. It said that the voice whispering about love was a sweet lie. The soft hands were a temptation of darkness. The melody said that the girl should not believe. Even if it is torn apart, even if the heart aches and strives for you. Consciousness was leaving her. But before her eyes closed, she saw a blurry face in front of her. The young king was reading a scroll in his palace, Baekhaegung, when a bodyguard approached him. Mr. Theron asked if he had forgotten that today was the night of consolidation. The subordinate replied that he had not. Then he excitedly noted that the master had less than a year to live without a heart. He lamented what the situation in Baekhaegung would be like without him. Theron touched his forehead in resignation. Then he looked up at Fago and asked if he should tell him again about his impotence. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully and noticed that the servant knew that he could not touch a woman. The scroll fell to the floor and unrolled. Fago winced and bowed. He apologized and said that he was worried about his master, so he took the liberty. His Majesty, citing fatigue, dismissed the bodyguard. The guy turned around and headed for the exit. Left alone, Theron grabbed his head. The servant had said too much. His head was splitting, so the master decided to lie down for a while. He headed towards the bedroom. On the way, with a snap of his fingers, the king instantly found himself in bed. His eyes immediately closed and he fell asleep. The Baekhaegung kings received the blessing of the god Hamu, and were born with a variety of talents that are not available to ordinary people. However, they were born without a heart, and if the women who loved them do not take their hearts, they will have 2 paths, death or turning into darkness. Theron's father took a woman's heart and survived, and the woman whose heart was taken cursed the unborn prince. Her curse was that he could not have contact with women. If he touched a woman, the place of contact would become disfigured and an attack would begin. There were cases when the boy was on the verge of life and death. It was a cruel curse for someone who can only survive thanks to a woman's heart. Therefore, the young man gave up long ago and drove all the women out of the Baekhaegung palace and locked the doors of the palace. However, thanks to magic, he saw the image of a floating girl who was barely breathing. The gentleman used all his magic power, trying to see who she really was. Theron caught a familiar scent in his sleep. His hand instinctively clutched the sheet. He felt something so soft and gentle next to him. His Majesty did not want to wake up. In his sleep, he heard someone calling his mother. His eyes suddenly opened. The king saw the dark-haired girl in his arms in horror. For a second, he froze in bewilderment. Then he jumped to the side abruptly. With the help of magic, with one movement of his hand, he lifted the girl into the air. Supported by magical waves, she hovered near the window, not far from the bed, still sleepy. The king did not understand who this girl was and where she came from in his bedroom. At first he decided that the servants had secretly sent her to him again. No wonder it's been so quiet lately. He told me not to do that anymore. But then His Majesty remembered that he had definitely not only touched her in her sleep, but also hugged her. Looking at his hands, he didn't notice any changes or damage. Tehran frowned. He didn't understand why he was okay. The hovering brunette blinked and opened her eyes. She saw an unfamiliar man with white long hair sitting on the bed in front of her. Looking around, the girl noticed that she was floating in the air. Frightened, she began to wave her arms vigorously. But it didn't help her go down. The white-haired man sternly asked who she was. Solu turned her head in different directions. The stranger in front of her seemed handsome to her, but she wondered where she was. Perhaps this was the afterlife. The king was clearly getting irritated. He asked again, louder, who she was. The girl gave her name. Theron angrily remarked that he was not interested in her name. His Majesty asked who had sent her this time. He did warn her that next time it wouldn't end well. The man asked her if she really wanted to die. The brunette stared at him, not understanding what he was talking about. She started asking if this was the afterlife, while comically waving her hands. The king looked at her in surprise and asked again about the afterlife. The girl, with her eyes wide open, clarified that she meant another world. Theron squeezed the magical flow in his fist, asking what kind of nonsense she was talking. He ordered her to say who she was again. The magic squeezed Sol's throat. She started coughing. The girl asked him to wait and promised to tell him everything when he let her go. The king weakened the magical flow and the girl was able to take a deep breath. Having caught her breath a little, she began her story. The brunette once again gave her name to Solu. Due to illness, she barely made it to age 20. At that time, her father suddenly died and the family's situation began to rapidly deteriorate. Many times her younger brother and sister went without food so that they could buy her medicine. The mother had a hard time making ends meet, and eventually she overworked herself and became ill. The girl blamed herself for all the family's misfortunes. However, she heard news that if she threw herself into the sea and sacrificed herself, the family would receive 500 bags of rice as payment. It was the only thing she could do for the family in which she had always been a burden, so she sacrificed herself to the sea. The last thing she remembered was drowning in the water. Then she asked if she was not dead. If she drowned in the sea, then this must be the afterlife. The king looked askance at the girl. She spoke plausibly, so he assumed that she was a storyteller at the fairs. The girl got angry. She shouted that it was true, and then asked why he was asking if he didn't believe a word of it. The king turned sharply to the door and called Fago, but he heard no answer, so he called the servant again. The girl asked him to let her go, but the man ignored her words. She didn't understand why he didn't even pretend to listen to her. Then the sound of the door opening was heard and Fago's bodyguard appeared on the threshold. The boy bowed before the lord and asked if he had called him. The king pointed to the floating girl and asked if it was his doing. The bodyguard did not immediately understand what the master meant until the king once again pointed out which way to look. The guy looked up and was very surprised. Stuttering a little, he asked why the girl was in the master's bedroom. The king asked if he was his bodyguard. Then, quickly drawing his sword from the scabbard on the servant's side, he moved it with lightning speed to point the blade at his neck. Theron asked angrily if not his bodyguard. Then who should know? The guy looked down. He apologized and said he had nothing to say. There was definitely nothing suspicious last night. The king just chuckled and called the guard sloppy. He asked the boy how he could be called his bodyguard after that. With the words, "You will be second," the king abruptly launched his sword towards the girl. The weapon dug into the wall just above her shoulder. The brunette's whole body trembled, staring in fear at the blade sticking out from her ear. Theron thought about how best to deal with her. He suggested cutting off her arms and legs and throwing them to the fish for food. Solu was even more horrified. The king was thinking of killing her. He wanted to leave an ambiguous warning to the instigator. But looking again at his hands, which were touching her body, he suggested that, just in case, he could start by observing. His Majesty entrusted her punishment to a bodyguard, telling him to investigate and report. Theron did not wish to stay here any longer. He headed for the door. The girl tried to say something, but the magical flow disappeared along with the king's departure, and she flew down with her eyes closed. But the bodyguard's hands caught her and prevented her from falling. The girl hiccuped in fear and, stuttering a little, thanked her savior. Fago said that her life now depended on her answer. Therefore, she had to answer honestly. Still holding Sola in his arms, the guy looked at her angrily and ordered her to tell him everything as it happened without concealment. He asked again who sent her here. The girl, stuttering, asked what they were talking about. It was all wrong. When she opened her eyes, she was already here. Looking closer, Fego saw that she was human. The brunette was surprised. Of course she was human. The bodyguard gently lowered her to her feet. Still looking at her with interest, he was surprised that now people were being secretly brought in from the land. Although, judging by her wretched appearance, she was clearly not sent to seduce Mr. Theron. Perhaps she really did end up in Baekhyun by accident, but she still needs to be thoroughly interrogated again. If she was kidnapped, the situation will be more complicated. Fego frowned and angrily asked if she considered this place a thoroughfare, and ordered her to quickly tell him who had sent her. Solu tried to prove her truth, but the guy interrupted her and, poking his finger into the girl's forehead, said that she was lying again. The girl should be extremely grateful that Mr. Theron spared her life. The brunette tried to say that they were wrong and that she wasn't lying, but she started to feel sick and her legs gave way. As she fainted, she managed to think that this damn disease had appeared again. Fego barely managed to catch her back. He did not know what to do, so he headed to the western chambers. Knocking on the door, he entered the master's room. The bodyguard apologized for disturbing His Majesty. Theron asked irritably what had happened. The boy frowned, realizing that the owner was still in a bad mood because of the incident. Fego bowed and apologized for the bad news. He said that it was about the girl from the master's bedroom. She suddenly lost consciousness, so he was unable to escort her out of the palace. The king's eye twitched nervously and he clenched his fist tightly. His Majesty asked if this meant that the girl was still in the palace. The servant hesitated, but then said that he had first moved her to a spare bedroom at the far end of the palace. Theron angrily ordered her to be thrown out, but the bodyguard pointed out that then, in addition to the bad rumors about sodomy, there would also be rumors about an unconscious girl from the palace. The king was indignant. He didn't care about any false gossip and once again ordered her to be driven away. Fego noticed that everything was not so simple. If they expose her in an unconscious state, then all the gossip of the people who do not know his secret will be taken at face value and spread everywhere. Then there will be false and senseless talk about His Majesty's abilities. Theron sighed helplessly and asked that in that case everything be dealt with quietly and without consequences. The bodyguard bowed and said that he would immediately settle everything and report back. After Fego left, the king examined his hands again to make sure they were intact. He closed his eyes, realizing how confusing everything was. So His Majesty decided to take a bath to clear his mind. Going to the washroom, Theron undressed and immersed himself in water with rose petals. Beautiful fish were swimming in the air around him. The gentleman thought about how unlucky he was, because this was the first time he had slept so well. He angrily slammed his clenched fist on the edge of the pool. All the fish flew away in the air currents. Having calmed down a little, the king thought that everything was all right with him after all. Perhaps he had dreamed how he was hugging the girl, but he was definitely hugging her tightly. That kind of contact would certainly not end in a simple attack. Even after all this time, he was fine. For a second, he assumed her heart. The gentleman shook his head, trying to push the thought away. This couldn't be happening. His Majesty rose abruptly from the pool. Judging by his indecision, he was indeed within reach of death. As I tiled the wash basins, the king reflected on the fact that perhaps what had happened was not a misunderstanding. This might be his last chance to win the heart. The servants began to dry the master with a towel. Theron thought that he had acted in an uncharacteristic emotional manner. He needed to find out more about the guest. The servants began to dress the king in clothes. Having dressed himself, His Majesty went in search of the girl, remembering on the way where Fego had taken her. Solu woke up and sat up on her makeshift bed. She clutched her head, realizing she had fainted again. Fego appeared at the door immediately. He asked her to stand up and said that he was sorry, but they needed to go somewhere. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked where. The guy turned his head and said that he would tell her when they arrived and asked him to follow her. The brunette touched her aching head again and stood up with difficulty. Every step gave off a crunch. It was hard for her to walk. Her head was still spinning. She always got sick after fainting. After walking a little, she squinted from the bright light. Solu asked if they had arrived at their destination. Looking around, she saw trees that were brightly glowing crimson. It was so amazing that the girl started spinning. She wondered what these glowing trees were. The smile never left her face. She was delighted by the beautiful glow of the trees. The girl began to say that her mother would have liked it too. But she didn't have time to finish speaking, because someone pushed her and she fell to her knees. Solu looked back angrily, wanting to know who had pushed her. But her eyes widened at what she saw. In the darkness, she saw shining sapphire eyes that belonged to some mythical creature that looked like a dragon. The girl was scared of the monster until she saw how the creature began to purr contentedly from Fago's petting. Looking at the animal in more detail, she saw a harness on its head and a saddle on its back. And the creature itself looked like a seahorse from the front. The boy extended his hand to her and said that this sea serpent was kind and not to be afraid of it. He waved his hand again, gently, inviting her to grab it. The brunette hesitantly placed her palm in his. The bodyguard immediately grabbed her and put her in the saddle, then jumped in himself. With one hand he grabbed the reins, and with the other he pressed the girl to himself. The guy asked her to be patient for a bit, because they were on the top of the mountain and there was no way to get down from here on foot. The brunette had never ridden a horse before. Fago decided to take her to safety on dry land, despite the fact that the master hinted at killing her. The serpent flapped its wings and rose into the air. Solu, seeing how the ground was moving away, got scared and pressed herself even closer to the guy. She asked him not to rise so high. The bodyguard tried to calm her down, saying that there was nothing to be afraid of. He joked that if she screamed, the sea serpent would fall down in fright. But the girl still practically pressed herself into the saddle. The creature rose higher and higher, flapping its huge membranous wings. Below was a beautiful view of mountains dotted with lights. Solu noticed the dazzling sparkles. She asked Fago what it was. The guy asked if she meant the lights of the courtyards. The brunette was not familiar with this word. He explained that this was the name of the inn. That is, the place around the palace where Haeguk received various guests. The courtyard extends far around the high mountain. The girl was delighted by the beauty of the radiance. Fago decided that nothing would happen if he told her a little. After all, she would forget everything anyway when she returned to dry land. He began to explain that in Haeguk there was more than just Haeguk, where they were now. Haeguk is divided into 5 countries with a mountain in the center. Cheonhaeguk, Haeguk, Wanghaeguk, Jahaeguk, Hughaeguk. From the palaces down to the very foot of the mountains there were inns. Solu wondered who managed such vast courtyards. It must be difficult. Fago replied that Haeguk had become a prosperous land due to the blessing of the god Hamu. And a prosperous farmstead is the result of the fact that the kings of each country did not sit idle. Usually the kings of each side take turns in general management, but they personally take care of the management of not only the common, but also the native farmsteads. The status of the guests varies. Since there are high-ranking persons from other countries among them, it is not permissible for commoners to welcome them. This is how the problem of shelter for passing wanderers is solved. The subjects like it because they earn well and do not worry about taxes. Solu was surprised. It was very different from the world she lived in. The guy replied that it was because people did not live in this world. The girl noticed that judging by the way the king looked after his subjects, it seemed that all the kings here had good hearts. The bodyguard confirmed that they were trying not only for the courtyards, but for the entire Haeguk. Although Mr. Tehran, who she encountered, seemed cold. Suddenly, Solu saw another glowing spot. Then she heard the sound of air being cut and something cut her hand painfully. Blood splashed onto Fago's face. The boy cursed and pulled his sword out of its sheath. As he approached, he noticed an octopus-like monster ahead. This was completely inappropriate right now. Blood began to flow from the wound on the girl's hand. The monster made another maneuver and again released flying spikes. Fago on the sea serpent managed to dodge the attack, but he knew that he would never defeat him alone, while also protecting the girl. The monster once again released a volley of spikes. The bodyguard managed to somehow fight them off. The blood from the girl's hand did not stop flowing and she tried to cover the wound with her other hand. Fago decided to ask for help from Mr. Theron by blowing his whistle, but then he noticed that the girl was losing consciousness. The guy shook her up a bit and said he needed her help. He showed her a whistle and told her to blow it while he repelled the attacks. The monster was approaching. The girl grabbed the whistle and blew into it with all her might. The octopus continued to attack with its spikes. Suddenly the air was cut by the whistle of a whip, which knocked down all the spikes. The bodyguard recognized the whip. Its owner immediately caught up with them on her sea serpent, a bright warrior with red hair. She jokingly asked Fago if he had a girlfriend. The guy was happy to see Miss Yoncho, but he was suspicious about how she came so quickly, as if she had been waiting. The redhead continued to tease. She asked what had happened because he had never seen girls before, and then Fago angrily said that he would tell the details later. But first he needed to deal with this creature. The warrior smiled, adding that the guy was being modest. After all, they were not strangers to each other. Then she saw that the girl was injured, so she suggested that they leave first. The guy muttered that the brunette was not his girlfriend. Hyunsho focused on the octopus, urging it to attack. She was ready to attack. The monster began to attack again. Many spikes flew towards Fago and the lady. With the help of a sword and a whip, the warriors were able to repel the attack. The bodyguard swallowed nervously. He saw that even several dozen of Baekhyuk's warriors would not be able to cope with this enemy. But the lady was confident in herself. It was hard for the guy to even imagine how strong she was, since she was confronting him alone. The warrior felt the thrill of battle. She noticed that if Theron arrived, it would become completely boring. So she suggested not to invite him and just have fun together. But Fago, apologizing, said that he was not as strong as she was and would be glad of any help. The lady was upset. Hearing another voice, she shuddered. Looking back, the red-haired one saw Theron flying up. The king on the flying snake noticed that the bodyguard had managed to fly away not far. Hyunsho angrily asked His Majesty why he came so quickly. His help was not needed. Theron replied that he didn't come for the monster and asked her not to worry. He wouldn't bother her. Looking at Sola, His Majesty saw blood on his hand. The bodyguard replied that she was not seriously injured, and the danger would be over if the bleeding was stopped quickly. At this time, the monster began to become covered in red spots. Yonko assumed that he was angry and perhaps help would be needed after all. The octopus prepared to release another batch of spikes. Fago determined that all the needles were pointing towards the king. So quickly turning to His Majesty, he shouted at him to take care. Theron, seeing the thorns flying towards him, put his hand forward and with the help of magic threw the needles aside. Solu watched the people around her and had no idea what was happening. Blood from the wound had already started to drip from her fingers. The girl was surprised by how much blood had managed to flow. Her vision became cloudy and she swayed. Fago felt the girl's body go limp and asked what happened. But the brunette had already gone completely limp in his arms. At that moment, one of the spikes hit the back leg of their snake. The animal jerked in pain, and the unconscious girl slipped out of the saddle. Fago tried to grab her with his hand, but he didn't have time and she quickly flew down. When Theron was 13, his father said he was going on a journey. He suddenly handed over the throne to the boy and left the palace. The monarch's sudden decision left the prince with no choice. A heavy burden fell on him. This heavy crown, entrusted to him at an early age, was not only his duty as a descendant of the Baekhyuk kings, but also a deadly curse. Women were inaccessible to him. Among the 5 kings of the country, only he was cursed. The day the curse becomes known to the people, everything may collapse. So until he gets the heart, he must be extremely careful. Theron managed to catch the falling girl. The bodyguard screamed in horror because the gentleman touched the woman. The king laid the girl across the saddle, covered in her blood. Pago wondered if Lady Yonsho had seen it, but the warrior was busy with the flying away monster. She complained that it was running away again, cowardly with its tail between its legs. Having shouted out how long the monster would run away, she rushed off in pursuit of him. His Majesty turned to Fago, holding the girl in his saddle. He asked his bodyguard to hurry before anyone saw. The guy looked at the king and the girl in surprise and did not understand how this was possible. Theron said that first the girl needed to be taken to the palace, and there he would explain everything to him, asking him to be patient a little. Having thrown Sola into the hands of a bodyguard, the king ordered that her wounds be treated immediately in the palace and then come to him. Then he would tell her everything. Sometime later, Fago knocked on the western chambers of the palace. As soon as he entered the king's room, the king immediately asked how the girl's hand was. The bodyguard replied that everything was fine. Then, still swallowing nervously, he asked how this had happened. Theron replied that he had touched her in the morning. The boy asked again. His Majesty added that he was talking about a girl. He had touched her in the morning. Fago still didn't understand why the master was okay. The king scratched his chin thoughtfully and said that was exactly the point. Besides, he didn't just touch her, he hugged her tightly. He bared his arm up to the elbow and said that he carefully observed the skin before lunch just in case. But there was no attack, no pain, and not even a rash. And there is still nothing. Fago immediately thought that this might mean that His Majesty would also be able to gain a heart and live. He smiled at the thought. The king looked at his hands again. Then, clenching his fist tightly, he warned that he would likely be busy from now on and therefore asked him to prepare himself. The night of consolidation is a mysterious night during which strange crying is heard incessantly. Unknown lights flicker and the sun merges with the moon. Everyone holds their breath in anticipation of dawn. If in impenetrable darkness, Where you can't see a thing, you follow the dim light. Then there will be something ugly and lonely. Theron nervously tapped his fingers on the table as he looked through the papers, thinking about how a week had already passed since the girl had arrived at the palace. It seemed to him that she was taking too long to recover from such a wound. The king wondered what would happen if she never opened her eyes. Fago entered the room and announced that Solu had regained consciousness. A pale girl appeared from behind him and stared at His Majesty. Theron turned his head towards her. The girl greeted him and then, after a moment's hesitation, said that she knew about the king saving her from death. His Majesty replied condescendingly that he did not do it for her gratitude. He was interested in something else. He then asked if she had told the truth then. Solu replied that of course she had, and that she had no reason to lie to a stranger. She never lies. The king thought that there really was no one who could kidnap and drag a person into the palace. Everyone valued their lives. The girl nervously fingered the fabric of her dress. After a slight hesitation, she asked where she was at the moment. The brunette added that she was now a little confused, as she was sure that she had jumped into the sea and died. Fago explained again that they were in the country of Haeguk, the underwater country of mermaids. The girl asked about the mermaids. The bodyguard confirmed and added that Baekhyun is the largest palace in the country. Solu trembled, realizing who this noble man in front of her was. But still, stuttering a little, she tried to clarify. Fago confirmed that it was indeed the king of Haeguk, Lord Tehran. The girl was happy to hear that she had not died. The king wondered if she had told the truth. Then she had nowhere to go. He then asked Fago if there was any work that could be entrusted to this girl. The brunette was surprised at first, but then happy that she would have a job. The bodyguard hesitated a little and said that the appearance of a woman in the palace would be too noticeable. Therefore, he suggested that she be placed in the courtyard and do some small work there. The king agreed that this was a good option, and said that from tomorrow she should be sent to the courtyard. Solu remembered that the courtyard was the lights she had seen in the mountains. A little nervous, she still made one last request. The girl asked if there was any work for her in the palace. She was ashamed to admit that even though she was an adult, she had no work experience. And since there are at least some people here that she knows, she gradually... But the king did not let her finish and said sharply, "No." The harsh response upset Sola almost to tears. Fago apologized and said that women could not stay in the palace. Trying to calm her down a little, he promised that he would put in a good word for her when she moved into the courtyard. But Theron had his own vision of the situation. He said that Fago was wrong. The boy and the girl stared at His Majesty with incomprehension. The king continued. He did not say that she would live in the courtyard. The bodyguard became nervous, trying to figure out where Solu would be. Theron replied that after finishing work in the courtyard, the guy would quietly take her to the palace, and added that he would allow her to live in the palace. And he himself thought that this would of course be somewhat annoying, and he would need to remove unnecessary variables. Fago asked where it would be best to put the girl. Theron thought for a moment and then replied that the spare bedroom she was in would be enough. The bodyguard bowed and said that he would walk the brunette to the bedroom since it was late, and then return. But before he could take a single step, the king stopped him and asked if there was any need to escort her back to where she came from. The guy hesitated a little and explained that on the way to the bedroom the girl could get lost in this huge palace. The king got a little angry and said that he had provided her with both work and a place to stay. And anyway, the guy was his servant, not this girl's. The girl noticed that she was not a girl. Her name was Solu. The king frowned and asked again. She repeated once again that she was not that girl, and her name was Solu. The king frowned even more. The brunette swallowed nervously, realizing that he was angry. The king commented that it seemed like she had a hobby of interrupting people, to which the girl asked a counter-question. Would the gentleman like it if she called him this man? She also has a name given to her by her father, and she simply asks to be called by her name. Theron replied that he didn't want to. He would decide what to call her. Solu's face twisted with anger and resentment. She thought that the king was so attractive, but he was doing God knows what. The king asked how she knew his name. The girl stared at him in surprise. She replied that she and Fago had just called each other by their first names. Solu proudly said that because of her illness she had read all the books at home, so she was not stupid. To which the king said that this meant that she would be able to reach her room on her own. The girl noticed that she had a poor sense of direction. His Majesty chuckled and replied that he didn't like anything about her. Solu thought it was mutual, but he still saved her and gave her a room. He doesn't seem all that bad, so she should be grateful. Therefore, the girl bowed and thanked him for saving her, and added that she would try to find the room herself. Leave the room. She first went to the left, then came back and went the other way, then came back and froze in confusion. Theron angrily ordered the bodyguard to simply take her away. Solu smiled and thanked the master. His Majesty turned away and ordered them to go already, and not to laugh here thoughtlessly. Solu and the bodyguard left the king's room. Theron exhaled loudly. This girl is cheeky and talks a lot about trivial things. At least it won't be boring anymore, he thought. Then His Majesty tried to remember who was currently in charge of all the farmsteads. At the moment, the current manager of all the courtyards was the king of Cheonhaeguk Soldam. He was at the main office of the farmsteads, looking through some papers when a maid came to see him and said that Mr. Kumjak was looking for him. His Majesty quickly stood up and turning to Kaka came close to her. The girl swallowed nervously and asked what was the matter. Soldam put his arm around the girl's waist and pressed her to himself. Making a semicircle as in a dance, he hung over her. Smiling with a slight flirtation, he noted how touched he was that she had come to him just for this. Kaka was fed up with this attitude and tried to gently free herself from his embrace. She noticed that the gentleman knew that there was always a shortage of workers in the farmstead, and he joked so carefree. She barely found time to come. The man replied that of course he knew this, which made him even more touched. Having returned the girl to an upright position, His Majesty bowed, saying that they would see each other later. Kaka was left perplexed. Mr. Soldam is of course a handsome, stately man and a good person, but as soon as he sees a skirt he immediately loses his head. From the outside, you wouldn't even know that he's the king of Cheonhaeguk. It would be great if he was even a little bit like Mr. Terran. The bodyguard escorted Sola to her room through the winding corridors of the palace. Looking around, the girl thought that she had never noticed before that the palace was so huge. If Fago hadn't walked her, she would have really gotten lost. Turning to the guy, she tugged at his sleeve and said that she wanted to ask him something. The bodyguard stopped and looked back, saying that she could call him simply by his first name, without the master. The girl was embarrassed and said that she felt more comfortable that way. Then, plucking up her courage, she asked if the guy was a mermaid. He replied that of course he was a mermaid, because Haeguk is the land of mermaids, to which Solu asked how that was possible. After all, mermaids have tails instead of legs. Fago explained that they can transform from human to mermaid and back. They usually walk on their feet when there is no need to swim fast. The brunette asked if it was then true that they were in the depths of the sea. The bodyguard replied that although they were at the bottom of the sea, it was a completely different space. The girl agreed because if she could breathe, she definitely couldn't be underwater. But paying attention to the fish swimming in the air, she noticed that fish only swim underwater. Touching a fish swimming past, the girl thought that it looked like her Neroni. Then Solu asked the guy what Mr. Terran was like. Fago tapped her on the head. Angrily, he called her back that girl, and complained that she was asking such questions. The brunette, scratching the top of her head, grumbled that she was not a girl but Solu. The guy agreed that she was Solu, and he reminded her that she said she was smart, but she didn't know that she shouldn't ask such questions. Solu said sheepishly that she only asked because they were alone, and he explained everything well. The bodyguard replied that he was his master after all, so she had to watch her words. Solu lowered her eyes and apologized. She thought that on land she really couldn't even talk about the ruler. But here she so easily asked a man she barely knew. Fago turned around and was already walking ahead. The girl decided that she needed to apologize to him. She didn't want to offend anyone. Solu quickened her pace to catch up with the boy. As she approached him, Fago said that he was scary. The girl didn't understand who he was talking about. The guy clarified that he was talking about Mr. Theron. Then he slapped his forehead, realizing that he had said too much. The girl said that she knew why he was ugly, because he was unhappy and lonely. Opening the door, he froze for a second from her words. As he led her into the room, the bodyguard said that there was a washroom in the room, so she could wash herself and go to bed. Then, patting her lightly on the head in a friendly manner, he said that she was a good girl. The girl blinked and thanked him, but she thought that he probably didn't hear her words. Fago headed back to His Majesty, but before entering the room he froze for a few seconds. He was thinking that if the Lord got Solu's heart, she would certainly die. His Majesty was thinking about something, scratching his chin. When the bodyguard entered the room, he asked if it would be okay if he took Solu's heart. Terran propped his chin up and asked what was wrong. Fago replied that he was worried, because this was the heart of a completely uninvolved person. Maybe he should try with other mermaids. The king reminded him that the boy knew perfectly well what had happened before. Then he said angrily that was enough. All women were annoying and irritating. The bodyguard thought that it was probably natural for Mr. Theron to think like that. The king nervously clenched his fist and said that on the contrary, everything turned out well. She is a human, but since no one kidnapped her and she threw herself into the sea and ended up here, there won't be any problems. After thinking for a few seconds, His Majesty asked Fago if he only needed to spend a night with her in order to take her heart. The guy confirmed, but added that before that he needed to make her fall in love with him. The king was surprised and asked what could be difficult about it. He was worrying in vain. After all, other kings did it calmly. Then, poking himself in the chest a little irritably, Tehran asked if the bodyguard thought he was cruel too. Does he think it's cruel to use others to survive? The boy said no. He thinks His Majesty's fate is cruel, but he thought guiltily that he felt sorry for Sola too. But he couldn't afford the luxury of sympathy. Tehran said that Fago was his devoted servant, and he added that he would not reveal his soul to the girl even a little bit, but would only use her to take away hearts. Fago frowned at these words. Looking at the servant, His Majesty said that it was clear from his face what he was thinking. The king pushed back his chair and, getting up, suggested that they take a walk and get some fresh air. Walking along the cobbled paths under the starry sky, Theron turned to Fago. He knew that Fago did not want the girl to die. The bodyguard looked down and replied that it would be a lie if he said he wanted her dead. Perhaps he shouldn't have learned so much about her. Theron stopped and looked back, wondering if perhaps Fago wanted him to let her go and die. The boy immediately replied that the well-being of the master and the well-being of Bekiguk were much more important to him. The king fell silent and continued his walk. Fago, after a slight hesitation, broke the silence. He asked the gentleman if it was dangerous to send Sola to the courtyard, since Mr. Soldum was there now, and his inclinations. The king abruptly interrupted the bodyguard and asked if he now doubted his close friend. Fago began to deny. Theron noticed that Soldum also had eyes. Even though he was crazy about women, he wouldn't fall for such a worthless girl. She doesn't even need to talk to him. He'll understand everything anyway. So there's nothing to worry about. Fago frowned and quietly said that the problem was that Mr. Soldam was not very picky about his choice of women. The next morning, when the bodyguard came to see Sol, she was already awake and ready. He asked her if she was comfortable sleeping. The girl smiled and happily replied that it was, and that the blanket was very soft. The bodyguard frowned, recalling the conversation with Mr. Theron yesterday. He knew that he couldn't ruin everything with useless sympathy. Solu noticed that the boy had turned pale, so she asked if he was okay. He replied that he was fine. Then he added that from today on she would be going to the courtyard and they were setting out right now. Fago immediately turned around and told her to follow him. The girl was a little surprised but obediently followed. Somewhere under the trees she stumbled but swayed and regained her balance. The guy said that they had already gone half the way and that the road ahead would be more steep. Solu was surprised that she would have to walk this mountain road every day now. She wondered what would happen if she suddenly fell. Fago replied that she had better pray that this did not happen. The brunette asked if tigers jumped out at night. The guy asked her a counter-question about what kind of tigers could be underwater. Solu looked up and saw the brightly colored sky shining through the leaves. She stared at it in surprise. The girl noticed that the sky was an amazing color like a coral sunset. And it wasn't even evening. Fago said that their sky is different from the sky on Earth, although sometimes it takes on the color of the earthly one. Solu was surprised by this phenomenon. Then she asked what she would do in the courtyard. Looking down, she reminded him that she had no work experience and was weak due to her illness. Fago replied that because of the wound on her hand, she would not be able to work fully until later. First, she needed to get used to the arrangement of life in the yard. The bodyguard added that fortunately this year the court is run by King Soldum. He is a very sensitive person, so if he puts in a good word, His Majesty will look after her. But there is something she should beware of. The girl asked in surprise what exactly. The guy hesitated a little, trying to find the right answer. Then he said that Mr. Soldum loves women very much. He was born that way. He might like her. However, then Mr. Tehran would be in a difficult situation. Solu did not understand what kind of difficult situation he was talking about. Pago thought to himself that unlike Baeki Gun, Cheonhaeguk was filled with beautiful concubines. He didn't know if Sola could be charming as a woman, but who knows? Maybe if you give in to her simplicity, you can find her cute. Approaching the huge gates, Fago creaked them open. Looking back, he said that this was the entrance to the courtyard. The guy praised the girl for having endured this long journey and invited her in. Solu turned her head in different directions, looking at everything around her. She was amazed at how big the courtyard was. Approaching the next door, Fago stopped and said that he needed to talk to Mr. Soldam, and that she needed to wait here for now. The brunette obediently agreed and remained waiting near the door, studying the buildings. Entering the room, the bodyguard closed the door loosely behind him, leaving a small gap. Solu was curious about what the king of Cheonhaeguk was like, so she approached the doors trying to see what was inside. Suddenly, right next to her ear, someone whispered to her what she was doing here. The girl shuddered in fear and looked around. She saw a cute guy with short blonde hair and a mole under his lip in front of her. The guy chuckled and tried to look through the crack, too. Realizing she had been caught red-handed, Solu tried to convince him that there was nothing there. Smiling, she said she was just waiting to meet Mr. Soldam. The blonde said that the gentleman was not there at the moment, and perhaps they would have to wait a long time. The girl asked him if he knew how much. The guy thoughtfully replied that His Majesty was not very conscientious, so... The brunette interrupted him indignantly. It turns out that he is dishonest and also loves women. She became interested in whether the farmstead works as it should. The blonde man put his hand to his mouth in mock surprise at the phrase, "loves women." Solu covered her mouth with her hands, realizing that she had blurted out too much. Her heart began to pound wildly at the thought that this man might be acquainted with Mr. Soldam. Nervously fiddling with her skirts, the girl apologized and said that she hadn't meant anything like that. She asked him to forget what she had just said. The guy crossed his arms over his chest with a smirk. The brunette, still nervous, tried to justify herself, saying that these were just rumors and not necessarily true. The blonde asked if she had come to meet him alone. Solu replied that she had not and that she had come with Mr. Fago. He was waiting inside. The stranger entered the door. The bodyguard inside immediately bowed upon seeing His Majesty. The king smiled and said that the lovely lady outside had said that she was looking for him. Then he asked her why she was looking for him. Fago replied that it was from Lord Theron and asked if His Majesty could assign her any work. Soldam chuckled in surprise that the incomparable Theron had sent a woman. The bodyguard replied that she was special and asked him to look after her. The king noticed that this woman was dear to his friend. He smiled and said that he understood everything more or less without explanations. She was sent here to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. Vago wondered if it would be a problem if the girl was sick. Soldam asked what she was sick with. The guy replied that she often lost consciousness for an unknown reason. His Majesty thought about these fainting spells, but the bodyguard assured that there were no other symptoms besides this, so there was no need to worry. The king said that in that case she must not be lost sight of for a second. Fago frowned and clarified. Soldam laughed and told him to tell the master that there was nothing to worry about, because he would not take his eyes off her for a moment. The guy cursed silently. After all, asking Mr. Soldam to look after the girl was like telling a cat to guard the fish. Still smiling, the king asked to keep it a secret for now that Soldam was him. He decided to get to know the girl better, since she was so dear to his friend. The bodyguard asked if this could be done by revealing his identity. The king waved his hand and replied that he would like to do the same. But after talking to the girl, he realized that because of someone's gossip she had convictions against Soldam. Fago lowered his eyes in annoyance. He realized that the master knew about his words to Solu. Soldam, having said that it seemed they had sorted it out completely, quickly turned around and headed towards the door, since they were being waited for outside. Approaching the door, the king said that he himself would show Sola everything, since today was her first day. He smiled and assumed that the bodyguard must be tired from the journey, and so smiling, he sent him off to rest. Fago denied that he was tired. He replied that in any case he had business here, so he could do everything himself since His Majesty was probably busy. Soldam looked at the boy condescendingly and said that he had no important business. Therefore, a free man should take on this. He enjoyed teasing and watching the big guy Fago throw himself around. Seeing how nervous the boy was from a simple joke, the king concluded that Tehran was finally able to hug a woman. The men approached Sol and the bodyguard told her to inspect the compound with the man and return. The blonde smiled, appreciating her unusual name, and said that he was pleased to meet her. The girl was nervous. She felt a little uneasy around him since she had said all sorts of things to him. Fago stroked the brunette's hair and asked His Majesty to send her with someone after examining her. The king smiled slyly and promised to send him with someone free. The boy looked at the king suspiciously. Mr. Soldam approaches everything with enthusiasm, But his jokes like these made Fago suspicious about whether it was okay to leave them alone. He left with a heavy heart. His Majesty began a tour of the courtyard for Solu. The girl looked around with curiosity. She was delighted that such majestic buildings stretched to the very foot of the mountain. She admired the houses not only from the outside, but also their interior decoration. She wondered if there was anything a newbie like her could do. Soldam began to think out loud. Serving guests was beyond her capabilities, as she might faint. Of course, cleaning was not an option either. Perhaps work with calculations that does not require physical strength would be suitable, the girl asked. His Majesty thought for a moment, and said that special knowledge was needed there, since the work would involve large sums of money. Solu's spirits sank. She thought she could handle everything, but in reality she couldn't do anything. It made her feel worthless. 2 girls came out to meet them. They were dressed in unusual bright clothes. The brunette looked at them without taking her eyes off them. She asked if these beautiful young ladies were guests. Soldam tried to understand what beautiful guests she was talking about. Seeing the girls ahead, he recognized them as his concubines. The man tensed up. He did not want to cross paths with them, because then Sol would find out who he was. He came up with a plan to avoid a collision. He hugged the brunette and pulled her behind the bookshelves. His heart was pounding loudly. The girl looked up at him and asked why he suddenly... But the blonde hissed at her and pressed his finger to his lips. He suggested playing a game. As Fago left Sola with the master, he was still worried. He was worried about one thing. Would everything be all right with these two? Soldam had already acquired the heart. In other words, he had long ago escaped the threat of death and turning to darkness. But for Mr. Theron, this girl may be his first and last chance, so he must not let her go under any circumstances. The bodyguard didn't know if Mr. Soldam had guessed this. There was something in his gaze. The boy was worried that Solu might succumb to his courtesy. He was amazed at Tehran's carelessness. But on the other hand, Soldam and his lord are inseparable friends, so the king knows his friend better than anyone. They have no reason to quarrel. Seolu was confused as she was being hugged by a blonde man behind the shelves. She didn't know what to do when she was suddenly hugged like that. In Baekguk, there is probably no division between men and women. For some reason, everyone here is handsome, as if handpicked. The neighboring guys were not like that. Soldam asked her what she was thinking about so deeply. The girl answered sheepishly that she was thinking about nothing. Then she asked what game he was talking about and what it meant. The man replied that it was something like hide and seek. The brunette asked why suddenly, out of the blue. The gentleman whispered that it was more interesting this way. Then he asked to see if those beautiful girls had left. Solu trustingly agreed. She carefully peeked out from behind the shelves and looked around. Then she also whispered that no one was visible. They had probably already left. The blonde laughed and noticed that despite her being against it, the girl was so drawn in. Solu rolled her eyes and was indignant. Soldam raised his hands in surrender and said he was just joking. He looked closely at the girl. She was undoubtedly innocent and pure. You couldn't find someone like her in Baekguk even with fire. She doesn't dress flashily like a regular concubine, but she always attracts attention. The man said that she was quite cute. The girl clarified what he said, realizing that he had said it out loud. The blonde scratched the back of his head in awkwardness and said that it was nothing. He understood that Theron's unexpected sending of a woman here meant that he intended to take her heart. It seemed he had managed to hug the woman. Soldam regretted that he would have to give in. The girl interrupted his thoughts by noticing that she still didn't know his name. She smiled and introduced herself to Sol and said it was nice to meet him. The blonde froze in confusion. As they say, the grass is always greener on the other side. But this wasn't just anyone. It was his friend's girlfriend. He couldn't let feelings develop for her. He swallowed nervously and ordered himself to pull himself together. Solu, still not receiving an answer, began waving her hands in front of the blonde's eyes, trying to get his attention back. She asked him again what his name was. Soldam hesitated a bit and then said that his name was Banyu. The brunette asked what he did in the yard. After thinking for a bit, Soldam replied that he was responsible for everything in the yard. The girl frowned and noticed that he, like her, was not particularly strong. She then continued by pointing out that he was not very slender for a man, and would be smaller than Mr. Theron. The blonde laughed and remarked that you can't say that to his face. Even though he looks like that, he's strong and does his job. Then, with a more serious look, he said that he was responsible for many things not because he was weak, but because he knew how to do many things. Patting him on the shoulder in a friendly manner, Solu sympathetically noted that he could tell it like it was because she understood him better than anyone else. The gentleman tried to prove that everything was wrong, looking into her eyes full of pity. He realized that her awkwardness would cause trouble for Theron more than once. Then he suggested that they stop chatting and continue their inspection. The girl nodded in agreement. They went up to the balcony to have a better view of the surroundings, then looked at the books in the library, checked how the maids were working. Almost half a day passed like this. The last place they went was the kitchen. It was always bustling there, so everyone was very nervous. The blonde said that she wouldn't have any business here, so she didn't need to worry. Hearing no answer, he looked back. Solu was just approaching. She apologized for walking slowly as she quickly ran out of breath. Soldam smiled and said she had nothing to apologize for and suggested she take a little rest. The girl replied that she was fine, but the man offered her to sit at the table. The brunette refused and said that she did not come here to relax, but still sitting down on the chair, she replied that it was also impolite to reject his kindness. Solu was being a little disingenuous. She had been sitting at home all the time, so her legs were falling off after walking today. Soldam said that he would now bring a cup of tea, and suggested that she sit down for a while and rest. The girl was nervous and replied that she didn't need tea. She just wanted to sit. She didn't want anyone to bother her. The man pretended not to hear what she said, and asked what else he wanted for tea. He assumed that she hadn't even been able to eat properly that day. Solu covered her face with her hands out of embarrassment and apologized. Soldam said that he should apologize for not being able to feed his subordinate and asked her to wait a little. At this time, in Baekhyun, Taeron was leafing through books. His thoughts were preventing him from concentrating, so he slammed the book shut. He tried to reassure himself that Fago was only worrying about Soldam for nothing. And yet perhaps he was not so perceptive. It was getting dark outside, and the bodyguard and the girl hadn't returned yet. After all, they had just gone out today to look around. So why were they so late? Solu walked with the blonde man between the trees under a sky strewn with stars. She thanked Mr. Banya for today. Thanks to him, she was able to look around the courtyard. The man smiled and said it was nothing. After all, he hadn't even been able to properly take care of her food. The girl noticed that the rice cakes he gave her with her tea were very tasty and sweet. It was the first time in her life that she had tasted something so delicious. Soldam replied that it was simply an appetizer, albeit sweet thanks to the licorice powder sprinkled on top. He noticed that she ate them with such appetite, so he collected some more for her to take with her, pointing to the bundle in his hands. He offered to take them and eat them when she was hungry. Solu clapped her hands in delight. She kept wondering what this bundle was. With a smile on her face, she noted how considerate he was that he even thought of this. The blonde tried to continue walking, but the girl stopped him and said that it wouldn't work that way. She tried to take the bundle since it was for her, which meant she had to carry it too. Soldam smiled and asked why a man would suddenly assign heavy work to a woman. He would carry it, and she should walk more carefully. The brunette opened her eyes in surprise. It was the first time she had been called a woman, since she had always been poor Solu. And Mr. Theron always called her little girl, the girl recalled angrily. Watching the bundle of pies swinging in the blonde's hands, the girl remembered that she hadn't eaten anything again this morning, and that was why it was so hard. After all, food is life. She muttered that the pies could be eaten in the morning. In the distance, Solu saw a shadow. She tried to look closely to see who it was, but it was dark and the face was not visible. But then the moon appeared from behind the clouds and illuminated the stranger. Solu gasped in surprise, because he turned out to be Mr. Thurano. Soldam saw him too. He greeted the man who approached and noticed that he had gone far. The king was also surprised to see his friend and asked what he was doing there. The blonde replied that there were reasons for that. Fago had asked him sincerely, so he went to see the girl off. In response, he asked why his friend had come so far. Was he really so worried about Sola that he had gone himself? Taeron replied that he had not gone crazy yet. He had just gone out for a walk and had met them by chance. After a long mutual glance, the king of Baekhyun thanked Soldam and said that he would handle the matter himself, and suggested that he return. Bundin smiled sweetly and leaned towards Theron's ear and replied that he had come so far and his throat was dry. Perhaps the gentleman would offer him some tea. His Majesty replied that he had no tea for him. Soldam did not retreat. He said that he would drink anything, given that there was still some conversation to be had. Solu watched the men with interest. Taeron told his friend to follow him. He thanked her with a smile. When the palace servants brought tea, King Baekhyeguk suggested that they get down to business straight away. He clearly told them not to bother the girl. Soldam clarified whether he meant Sola by girl. Taeran confirmed. The king of Cheonhaeguk tried to say something, but he interrupted him, asking if he really didn't know. He should have figured it out. Soldam played dumb and said that of course he didn't know. That's why he was asking. Theron scratched his chin in irritation and noticed that his friend had a bad character, because she definitely wants him to say it out loud. Yes, this girl will give him her heart. Soldam, crossing his arms under his chin, noted that he thought he had made a mistake, since with such intentions her friend was treating her incorrectly. He asked if Taeran knew that he could only take the heart of the woman who loved him. King Baekhyeguk replied that he knew everything, and asked how he was treating her wrong. Soldam threw up his hands and asked her to make her face simpler. And then he asked how he, knowing this, had not even fed her breakfast. The girl was hungry all day long, so it was a shame to watch her gobble up the pies. Taeran thought about it. The king of Cheonhaeguk asked if his attacks had passed since the woman had appeared so suddenly. His Majesty replied that he did not know why, but he did not react to it in any way. Soldam was delighted and congratulated her. He suggested clinking their cups in a toast. Taeran didn't like the idea. The king of Cheonhaeguk remarked that he was still sorry, since he had started to be interested in Solu. His Majesty frowned and asked if she was his type. Soldam asked when he had ever cared about his taste in women. Solu has a charm that is unique to her. She seems thin, but her cheeks look so soft. Her eyes are clear and intelligent. She doesn't open up when people try to quietly find out about her, but she comforts others even without knowing them. And she is so pure without embellishment, something you rarely see among concubines. Theron suggested speaking frankly. He noted that it was not right to steal a friend's girlfriend. Soldam smiled. King Baekhyeguk said that there was nothing to be done then, and suggested that he try to do it his own way. Soldam didn't understand. Then Theron said that if he wanted to take her away, let him try. The blonde opened his eyes in surprise, and the king added that he knew what was on his mind. He wanted to be cunning again to see his reaction. Soldam chuckled loudly and then laughed, noting that his friend could not be fooled. He scratched his head guiltily and said that he had just cast his line, wanted to make a joke, but it had come back to haunt him. Then he asked him when he had figured it out. The king of Cheonhaeguk added that he was not so shameless as to steal a friend's girlfriend. Taeran smirked, asking if he had any conscience. Soldam replied that he was the kind of person who couldn't easily give up Solu, but maybe he could help win her heart. The king of Baekhyeguk asked if he would really help. The blonde man confirmed with a smile because his friend did not understand women. He needed experience communicating with them. Theron chuckled and said it was funny. He asked if he didn't know who he was. Does his friend really think that he can't charm some ordinary girl? Although he had no connection with women because of his peculiarity, nevertheless everyone fell in love with him because of his appearance. The brunette is not blind either. Soldam noticed that Solu didn't seem to have any interest in him. She wasn't like all the other girls he'd seen. She wasn't the type to be swayed by looks. Thurano rested his head on his hands tiredly. He asked what then? Maybe dance in front of her. Soldam laughed and asked to spare him this sight. He suggested spending time just the two of them. For example, to see Haekguk on Cheon. Cheon is the sea serpent of His Majesty. The beautiful scenery from a bird's eye view will create the right atmosphere. Taking a sip of tea, Theron firmly refused. He remarked that it was even funny, and he asked me to suggest something worthwhile, and not this nonsense about riding a snake. Soldam rose from his chair in indignation and asked what he should do with this amateur, since he apparently didn't really want to live. He closed his eyes tiredly and asked his friend to come to his senses if he didn't want to die. Now was not the time to get cocky. Theron asked why she was being taken for a ride at all. The blonde slammed his palm on the table, calling him a fool. Women value actions that are just for them. Then, sitting back in his chair, he told him not to ask questions but just do as he said. Unless, of course, he wanted to die. The king of Cheonhaeguk took out a piece of paper and handed it to Taeran. When he unfolded the paper, he saw a list and asked what it was. Soldam replied that it was a list of clothing stores where he often bought gifts for his concubines. Taeran asked why he needed it, to which the blonde said, "Get up early tomorrow and buy some nice clothes for Solu. It's not right that all her clothes are shabby." The king of Baekhyeguk scratched his head in confusion, calling his friend a bore. Then he asked if that would be enough for her to love him. Soldam replied that this was the base. First, at least this had to be done, and then they would talk. The main thing was to please Sola as often as possible. Theron needs to remember that the girl's mood is more important than his. He said he understood and waved his hand, telling his friend to go away. The next morning, Solu eagerly unwrapped the bundle of pies that Mr. Banyu had kindly packed for her the day before. Opening the box and taking out the pie, she happily anticipated trying it. Out of nowhere, a fish appeared in front of her eyes, frightening the girl. She drooled over her pie. Solu noticed that she knew a lot about tasty treats. Then she started breaking the pastry, as it was too big for the fish. But then there was a knock on the door and they asked permission to come in. Opening the door, the brunette saw a portable table in front of her, filled with various dishes. The servant entered the room with food. The girl was amazed beyond measure. She did not understand what was happening. Fago, who came in after the servant, said that Lord Theron had ordered that she be sure to eat. Then the guy added that today she would not go to the courtyard, but would be with the master. The girl tried to clarify, but the bodyguard replied that His Majesty would tell her the details himself. Several more servants followed him in with boxes. The boy explained that these red boxes contained gifts for her from Mr. Theron. Let her look, put on what she likes, and go out. The girl, still perplexed, nodded in agreement. Fago closed the door and walked down the corridor, but remembering something, he returned. Looking into the room, he added that she should calmly leave the food if there was suddenly too much of it. No need to force it into herself. Solu had just started eating, and turning to her bodyguard, she said that she was simply very hungry. After leaving her room, Fago realized that he had worried for nothing. She hadn't eaten properly since arriving in Baekhyaguk, so she must be extremely hungry. Solu ate every last crumb. She was happy about the first rice she had eaten in a long time. Tapping her full belly, she finally felt alive. The girl thought about Theron. Although he was harsh, he seemed kind since he cared so much. He fed her and brought her clothes. He was definitely not bad. Coming to her senses, she remembered that she still needed to change and go out. So there was no time for long reflections. The brunette began to unpack the boxes. After taking out all the clothes, she grabbed her head and wondered why all the skirts were so short. Remembering that all the girls in the courtyard wore something like this, I calmed down a little. Probably mermaids always wear something so short. After looking through all the clothes again, Solu settled on a dress that was longer than the others. Fago was waiting for the girl outside the door when he heard the sound of footsteps. Mr. Theron was approaching him. The bodyguard asked him why he had come here. The gentleman replied that he had been waiting for a long time, so he decided to ask if they were going to come at all. The guy replied that choosing an outfit takes time, but she should go out soon. Then the door creaked open and the men all looked around with attention. Solu came out of the room in a new outfit and with her hair pulled back. The dress beautifully emphasized her figure, revealing her slender legs. The long train at the back added zest to the image. The girl greeted the gentleman. He swallowed nervously at the sight of the girl as he felt a strange excitement in his chest. Solu turned to the gentleman. She didn't know if she could talk about the gift like that, but she was wondering if there were any other clothes. The girl tried to pull her skirt down because her legs were too exposed, and the shoes were very uncomfortable because of the strange heel. The king looked at her in surprise, cursing silently. It seemed he hadn't thought about the fact that the clothes on the mainland and in Haeguk were probably very different. Fago cheerfully remarked that the gentleman must have been in a hurry because of business. Solu asked if she was going to another place today, instead of the courtyard. The bodyguard confirmed and added that as soon as they finished, the gentleman would immediately give her more comfortable clothes. His Majesty indignantly asked why he was lying so badly. After all, he had no intention of doing so. Fago asked them not to interfere. Theron turned around, intending to go. He said that they were already very late, so they needed to hurry. Solu followed him with an unsteady gait. Fago, looking after them, wondered if the gentleman could manage alone. The girl caught up with the king and asked where they were going today. His Majesty, without turning around, answered that nothing like that. Just explore the surroundings of Haeguk together. It will be an easy walk with Cheon. The brunette scratched her head in confusion. The girl realized who Cheon was when they approached the sea serpent. She remembered her previous flight with Fago, when she was injured and when she fell down. Solu swallowed nervously, as she only had bad memories associated with this animal. Theron stroked the animal, then put his foot in the stirrup and deftly jumped into the saddle. From there, he looked questioningly at the girl and asked why she was only looking and not climbing in. The brunette replied that Chan was too tall for her. She tried to climb on him, but to no avail. A bodyguard appeared in the distance, and seeing Solu's futile attempts to climb into the saddle, He realized that his worries were not in vain. He turned to Mr. Theron and asked him to come over for a moment. Approaching the bodyguard, the king asked what was going on. The guy explained to him that Solu was too short for the kite, so she needed help to climb up. To this, His Majesty responded that Lady Yancho climbed and rode without any problem. Pago noted that she was a special case. Then he whispered that girls are touched by such trifles. Therefore one must be attentive to Sol. His Majesty sighed heavily and remarked that it was troublesome. Then he asked doubtfully whether the guy himself had experience with girls. Fago replied that he shouldn't worry about it. He had studied literature yesterday and now he understood women very well. Theron returned to the girl and asked her to come closer. She asked what had happened. His Majesty quickly lifted her up and seated her in the saddle. Then he climbed in himself. Solu was surprised by his actions. She wondered why he suddenly did this. She was scared when he suddenly lifted her up. Having settled into the saddle, Theron said, "Let's go." The animal instantly rose up and flew at speed. Solu squeezed her eyes shut in fear. They were driving even faster than last time. The king asked her why she had closed her eyes. She needed to look around properly. The girl agreed and opened her eyes slightly. She saw clouds floating lightning fast under her feet, so she said she was scared and asked to go a little slower. His Majesty asked why. The brunette replied that she couldn't look anywhere when they were moving so fast. Tyron held Cheon back a bit and asked if this was okay. Solu was able to fully open her eyes and look around. She was delighted by the landscape of mountains, partially hidden by clouds. The girl saw such a landscape for the first time in her life. The king noticed that he was the only one showing it to her. Solu asked what the brightly shining trees she had seen last time were called. He replied that they are called Chawan. The whole of Haeguk is covered with them. They glow themselves, so even at night they shine brightly. The brunette expressed understanding as to why it wasn't so dark and beautiful at night. Theron thought that this girl was not constant. Just a minute ago she was screaming with fear and now she was delighted. And she complained about her clothes that they were short. But she wears them normally. She doesn't even notice that her legs are so bare, and he looked at her thighs over the saddle. Suddenly he felt a tightness in his chest again, like when he saw her in her new outfit. Plus he felt a flush of heat. He turned his head vigorously from side to side, wondering if he was feeling any better. Then Solu said that she knew everything. Although he was rude on the outside, he was actually kind. The king did not understand what she was talking about. Turning to him with a smile on her face, she explained that he had fed and clothed the stranger and was taking such good care of her. Certainly, deeds speak louder than words. His Majesty was stunned for a second, then suddenly pulled on the reins and the animal jerked and rushed back at speed. Solu gripped the saddle tighter in horror and asked why they were racing again. The king broke out in a cold sweat and decided that at this rate he would soon faint. He began to think hard about what to do. Suddenly, the girl turned around and hugged Theron, screaming that she was scared. She held him tightly and asked him to fly slower. It was so unexpected that Theron pulled on the reins. The flight slowed down. Still clinging to her master, Solu opened one eye and noticed that they were flying slower. Having moved away from the man a little, the girl sighed heavily and wiped the sweat from her forehead. But she turned to His Majesty and asked how he could drive away so suddenly. The king was in a daze. The girl asked how he was feeling and checked the temperature of his forehead. She noticed that he was flushed. The man abruptly pulled her hand away and rudely asked how she dared to touch someone else's face so unceremoniously. The brunette turned away and apologized. She decided that he was very angry. Soon the king returned to the palace. The bodyguard found Theron unharnessing the kite. He was surprised because the gentleman had said that he would return only in the evening. And now it was still the middle of the day, so he asked why he had returned earlier. The king looked at him strangely but said nothing. Fago asked what had happened. His Majesty replied that nothing had happened. He took the girl to the courtyard and returned. The guy thought that if nothing had happened, he wouldn't have been so excited. Theron walked to the stall and abruptly put down the harness. He tensed, trying to sort himself out. It was the first time His Majesty had experienced such an attack. He had never had symptoms like these. His heart was pounding so hard that he felt sick. The king assumed that the transformation into darkness had already begun. Smiling bitterly, he realized that the hour of death was indeed near. At this time, in the headquarters of the farmsteads, Soldam was giving instructions. He asked the maid to take care of everything that could cause inconvenience to the guests. Looking into the distance, he saw some swaying silhouette. Looking closer, His Majesty recognized Sola. The girl was rocking violently from side to side. Everything was blurry before her eyes. Falling to her knees, the brunette threw up right on the sidewalk. The blonde ran up to the girl asking if she was okay. Her body was shaking. Solu looked up at him with a strangely colored face and barely recognized him. But she replied that everything was fine. Then she added that she was just seasick. The man asked who could bring her some water. The girl refused. Solu grabbed her head and said that if she had known, she would not have had such a heavy breakfast. Soldam asked what happened. After all, she was supposed to be examining Haeguk and Terrano. The brunette lowered her eyes sadly and replied that at first she was delighted when he told her about the walk in the morning. But when they were riding on Shion, the gentleman suddenly felt ill. So he dropped her off here and flew away. Soldam thought that this Theron had done things his own way again. He had taught him so much. Solu smiled and regretted that she couldn't see everything. But she still had a lot to learn here. And she felt calmer with Mr. Banyu. The blonde replied that since she wasn't going to say hello, there was no need to be overzealous. The brunette rose to her feet and began to hurry the gentleman. The real Banyu was passing by nearby. Hearing his name, he stopped and looked closely. At this time, the girl asked Soldam what she could do. The man thought for a few seconds and then said that there was just one important matter for her. Solu beamed with anticipation. The gentleman said that she needed to study the guest's preferences. The girl was surprised. Soldam asked her to look back. An important woman in long robes and with purple hair was passing by. He said that she was a guest from the neighboring country of Yangguk. Solu's jaw dropped at the woman's elegance. The king explained that this guest was very rich. She always moved with a crowd of attendants, so she was very important for the courtyard. Solu clarified that she needed to learn the tastes of such guests. The man confirmed. He said that the farmstead is only in Haeguk, but due to rumors of its prosperity, there is a possibility that farmsteads will start opening in other countries as well. The girl suggested that they could then lure away all the clients. Soldam agreed with her and said that this is why she must take on a very important role. The blonde smiled. He knew the guests' tastes and everything for a long time, and there was no need to deal with this. He pointed to the top floor windows and said that would be her workstation. From there, everything was in full view, perfect for studying guests. Soldam suggested that she go up there. Having gone up to the room, Solu saw that the entire courtyard was indeed in full view. She said that the room was simple and neat and asked who had lived there before. The king replied that it was Lord Thorano's room. The girl was very surprised. The blonde man told her not to worry. Mr. Soldam was using the room now, so no one should come. The girl apologized and asked him not to think that she was awkward with Mr. Thorano. Then she asked if there was anything she should take into account when working. His Majesty said that it was wrong to suddenly speak to guests, because strangers mean danger to them and they react sharply. It is important to learn about them by observing. The girl understood why he was talking about studying the guests. The man wished her luck in her work and said that he would go and do his business for now. When the door closed behind him, Solu returned to the window. She decided that since she had been entrusted with such a task, she would not fail. She would study each and every one of them. After half an hour of observation, her inspiration disappeared. There was practically no one, no guests, not even a fish. She fell asleep from idleness. Suddenly the door opened and an unfamiliar man in black clothes, a wide hat with a veil and a bandage over one eye, entered the room. Solu was surprised by the stranger, because Mr. Banyu said that no one would come. Then she assumed that it was probably Mr. Soldam. The girl approached him and greeted him, calling him Mr. Soldam. She gave her name and said that from today she was working in the courtyard. The man looked at her strangely and said nothing. He walked past her and sat down at the table. The real Soldam entered the room at this time and saw a man sitting at the table with Sola next to him, offering him a cup of tea. She called him Mr. Soldam and asked him to say something. Coming closer, the blonde recognized the man as Banya. Seeing movement from the side, Solu looked back and saw the king. She addressed him as Mr. Ban. At this, the real owner of the name turned his head and looked at them from under his hat. The girl tried to explain that Mr. Soldam had arrived, but the king did not listen to her and quickly walked around and approached the man in black. With a sweet smile, he grabbed his hand and asked him to step outside for a moment. Dragging the stranger by the hand toward the exit, he told Sol that they would be quick. The girl said goodbye to Mr. Soldam. The door quickly slammed behind them, leaving the girl in confusion. Touching the back of her head in confusion, she thought she had done something wrong. Still pulling Banya by the hand, His Majesty asked why he had appeared out of nowhere like a jack-in-the-box. Then he apologized and said that he had little time now and asked to come another time. And in general, it is better to warn in advance about the visit. Banyu pulled his hand away and stopped. He said that Soldam owed him an explanation as to why this girl was calling him by a false name. His Majesty laughed and said that she must have gotten them mixed up, since they looked very similar. Banyu glanced at him with his one eye and asked where they were similar. Soldam didn't lose his head and replied that they were both handsome. The man chuckled, then poked the king in the chest with his finger and told him not to be cunning, and to explain everything to him properly later. And he also warned that if His Majesty suddenly did something wrong, he would not let it go. Soldam began to realize that things had become more complicated. With feigned cheerfulness, he asked who he thought he was. The blonde man returned to the room. Solu, who was standing on the balcony, looked back when she heard him return. She asked if it was Mr. Soldam. The king lowered his eyes and sighed heavily. He knew he had to tell her everything, so he started to say that he had to confess to her. But the girl interrupted him. With a thoughtful expression on her face, she noted that Mr. Soldam looked somehow too cold for a kind person. She also saw no signs of laziness or any special love for women. It seemed to her that he was not so terrible. Then she apologized for interrupting him. The king laughed and said that it was not Mr. Soldam but his friend. He decided not to rush to confess. There would still be a chance. The girl was glad that she was wrong. The blonde noticed that she seemed to be coping with the job. Solu remembered her duties. She said, upset, that she had not seen a single customer during all this time. Therefore, she assumed that perhaps all the customers had already been lured away. Soldam, trying hard to hold back his laughter, asked the girl not to worry. He explained that this was the main office, where only wealthy guests came, so there were few visitors. Solu was happy because she thought that everyone had really been lured away. The man told her again not to worry, but just work hard. The girl at work did not notice how evening had come. The king asked if she was up to the task. Solu confirmed. She was interested in studying the guests, and memorization with the help of drawings brings its fruits. Thus, chatting about the little things that had happened during the day, they strolled along the sidewalks of the courtyard. Approaching the gate, the girl thanked them for seeing her off and said that she would get there on her own. The man said that he would walk her to the palace, otherwise she might faint. The girl replied with confidence that everything would be fine, since there weren't even any tigers here. Soldam was surprised when he heard about the tigers. Then he noticed the blood on her heels. Solu lifted her leg and said that it was because she had been wearing new shoes all day. The blonde began to insist that he would still take her. The girl replied that he shouldn't worry. She just rubbed it a little, saying how stubborn she is. The man knelt down and, taking her foot, he took off her shoe. Then he wrapped the wound on his leg with a handkerchief and told him to treat it as soon as he reached the palace and wished him a good journey. Solu thanked him. She was very surprised when he suddenly dropped to his knees. She decided to get home quickly, since she couldn't disturb such a good person. On her way to the palace, the brunette heard a quick sound above her. Opening the gate, she looked up to see what it was. But noticing nothing, the girl went inside and froze at the entrance. There were glowing chakvan trees all around. She happily jumped from one tree to another. Then Solu saw some shimmering flowers below. She sat down next to one. She thought they were the glowing flowers of Chawan. She carefully touched the flower. Hearing a rustling sound behind her, the brunette looked back and saw the silhouette of a man. When he approached the light, she recognized Mr. Theron. Solu asked him what he was doing there. He said that she had to come back straight after work, and also asked what she was doing there at night. Solu smiled and replied that she had been looking at the flowers and trees of Chawan that he had told her about that morning. Then she noticed that he seemed to be feeling better. The gentleman frowned and, turning around only rarely, said to go quickly, since it was already late. He thought that what had happened in the morning would get better. When he calmed down, the physical symptoms also went away. But as soon as Tehran remembered that scene, he would feel hot again, and it seemed like he was going crazy. Then he heard a strange, dull sound. Looking back, the king saw that Solu had fainted. The only question that interested him was why now? He picked her up and carried her into the palace. The girl began to come to her senses little by little. She felt as comfortable as in her father's arms, who had hugged her as a child. The king opened the doors and Soldam was waiting for him in the room, leafing through a book. Seeing Tehran enter, he smiled. The king of Bekyaguk noticed that the guest was still there. The blonde man slammed the book shut and replied that they had not yet spoken. Theron frowned and asked if he was going to nag him again. His friend had flown in so quickly, as if he had some urgent matter to attend to. It seemed that it was not enough for him to simply see her off. Soldam, ignoring his question, asked how Solu was. Theron angrily asked him if he was even listening to him, but he still replied that she had fainted on the way, so he handed her over to Fago and came. The king of Cheon-haeguk thoughtfully said that he knew it. The palace master replied that if he was done nagging, he should quickly return to the courtyard. But Soldam said he wasn't done yet. Today everything had failed again because of Theron's whims, so tomorrow let him at least go with her for a boat ride. The king of Baek-haeguk winced and frowned. He wondered if his friend really thought he had nothing to do. The blonde rolled his eyes and said that then he could just die. Theron chuckled and turned away. Soldam asked why His Majesty was offended, since he had said it as it was. The king was silent for a minute, and then explained that when he was with her, his body behaved strangely. The blonde asked him what he meant. Tehran said that it wasn't his whim that he sent her away in the morning. After he accidentally glanced at her bare legs, his chest felt tight and it seemed like it was about to burst. Remembering those feelings, the gentleman hung his head dejectedly. He couldn't even breathe properly then. Tehran understood that this was not right, but as he imagined them together, it became physically difficult for him. The man took a deep breath and asked sadly if this was also part of the curse. The king of Cheon-haeguk crossed his arms and noticed that he had fallen in love with Seola. Tehran turned around abruptly and asked what that meant. Soldam replied that perhaps it was even better that way, since he had not forgotten what happened to a girl whose heart had been taken away. His Majesty did this knowing that a tragic end awaited both of them, so it was better to fill the short time together with only happy memories. In that case, the least he can do for Solu is to be sincere. Then he asked why he didn't focus on his feelings. Theron asked not to talk nonsense. He knows himself better than anyone. He has no feelings for this girl. Turning away from his friend again, he said that he was a fool for asking him. Soldam calmly replied that in any case, he was not being honest. The next morning in the courtyard, Solu was sorting out the guests with the help of drawings. The blonde found her doing this when he entered the room. The girl immediately jumped up when she saw him. Noticing the number of sketch drawings, Soldam was surprised at how much she had already managed to do before lunch. The girl smiled and said that she didn't know how well she did, but she tried her best. She then added that in the morning, Mr. Theron told her to return to the palace after lunch because there was business. The blonde was surprised to hear about it. The girl said that the gentleman suddenly suggested going for a boat ride. Heading towards the exit, the man smirked at the fact that his friend still obediently obeyed him. The king asked her to wait here for a while. The girl was surprised. He pulled the cord and said that not long, just a little bit. The girls came into the room with boxes. Soldam explained that she needed to dress up properly because she was going to have fun. Solu stared in admiration at the girls who entered. They were very beautiful. The ladies surrounded her, admiring how cute she was. After seating her on a chair, they began to examine her face and check her hair. Soldam watched Solu's preparation process with interest. He decided to find out what was really on Theron's mind. The concubines cast a spell over Solu's image. They noticed that no matter what you do to her, everything will go well. One of them asked who this girl was. Soldam stood with his arms crossed. He said he couldn't give details but asked her to take care of her. One of the girls said he was intriguing. The king wondered how a blockhead who didn't even understand his own feelings could understand the feelings of others. First, Theron had to accept his feelings. This means that in order to get out of his shell, he will need light shock therapy. His Majesty chuckled in anticipation. The concubine glared at him. She answered with resentment in her voice. She felt something was wrong, and she assumed what this girl is the next concubine. Soldam became a little nervous and asked them not to rush to conclusions, and then added that they would be misunderstood. Then the girls threw him out the door. Since he wouldn't tell, he should wait outside. His Majesty thought with resentment about how one could speak to him like that, since he was the king. The voices of the concubines could be heard from the room. The man pricked up his ears. The girls admired Solu's skin. Therefore, it would be better for her to apply light makeup. The king was intrigued and decided to sneak a peek. He decided that nothing bad would happen if he didn't interfere. Soldam opened the door a little and peered in through a small crack. What he saw delighted him. Sometime later, Theron was waiting for the brunette next to his kite. She didn't keep him waiting long and was already flying up. The king was surprised to see Seola and King Cheon-haeguk together. He thought that his friend had nothing better to do since he kept showing up. Besides, this girl was always whining that she was scared when they were riding on Cheon. At this time, Soldam had already landed and was helping Sola down, holding her by the waist. Watching this, Theron whispered that he didn't like it. So he quickly walked towards the couple who had just arrived. King Bakiguk came up to them and angrily asked why his friend had come. Soldam turned around and waved his hand, pretending to be scared. Then he calmly explained that they were late from work, so he gave them a ride. Leaning towards his ear, the blonde whispered that he had a present for his friend and asked him to look at Sola. Taihan turned to see what was wrong with her, and he froze in surprise. The girl looked wonderful with her hair tied up with ribbons. The purple color of her outfit suited her very well. The king's cheeks instantly turned red and he turned away. Solu giggled and asked him his opinion on her appearance. She added casually that Mr. Banyu said that she was very beautiful now. The girl kept talking about how the sophisticated ladies dressed her up, how they complimented her, and that's why she was in a very good mood. Theron looked at her askance from under his veiled hat. He told Soldam that they were messing around with all sorts of nonsense, and then turned sharply to the girl. Still smiling, Solu asked if something had happened or if she had done something wrong. The king put a hat with a veil on her and, pointing his finger at her, ordered her to wear a headdress. Theron cursed silently. He didn't understand the reason, but for some reason it irritated him that Soldam was looking at the girl. Maybe it was because he was digging around in his soul. At that moment, a friend leaned in his ear from behind and whispered to him to accept his feelings. King Bekiguk turned around abruptly and angrily said that he knew it was all because of him. But Soldam covered his mouth with his hand and cheerfully said, "Not to thank, but to have fun." Then he quickly jumped onto his kite and soared upward, leaving Theron shaking with anger on the ground. His Majesty adjusted his hat and remarked that it would be too much trouble to argue with this blockhead. Then he turned sharply and hurried the brunette to Chan. The girl shuddered and froze, remembering this animal. She tried to climb on it, but to no avail. Then Tharana picked her up and sat her in the saddle. Jumping on from behind, he took hold of the reins. Solu turned to the Lord and said that for some reason when she was with him, she remembered her father. The king was surprised. The girl explained that he was indifferent but kind, just like her father. She also knew that the king carried her all the way to the bedroom while she was unconscious, and now he took care of her, raising her to Chan. This all brings back memories of her father. The man indifferently noted that he had never had daughters, and he did not treat her this way out of any special love. Solu winced and scratched her head thoughtfully. She admitted that she might have been mistaken, and she thought to herself that she had done something again that made the gentleman angry again. Tehran in turn wondered why she was comparing him to her father. Perhaps the brunette meant that he was so kind and therefore not up to par as a man. His Majesty thought that all women fall in love as soon as you smile at them, that they are all hunters for money and glory. So he couldn't understand why she was talking this nonsense about him being like her father. The king tried to reassure himself, saying that there was no need to worry, because he would simply have her heart and that would be the end of it. They flew to the lake. A magnificent view opened up before Solu's eyes. She froze in admiration. A boat with a small covering like a roof was already waiting for them near the pier. The girl stared at her in amazement. Then she asked if the boat was his. The man stepped abruptly onto the bow of the boat and told her to stop chatting and get into the boat too. Looking at the creaking vessel, the girl realized that she was worried. She tried to step onto it carefully, but she miscalculated something and fell. As she stood up, Solu apologized and explained that it was her first time in a boat, and she was having trouble keeping her balance. Theron looked at her with annoyance. Then he turned slightly and offered her his hand, telling her to grab it if she needed it. When Soldam returned to the main office of the courtyard, he immediately went to the concubines who were helping Saul. With a smile on his face, he opened the doors to announce that he was back. The king thanked the girls and said that they had worked hard today. Now they need to return to Cheonhaeguk and then he noticed Pago in the room surrounded by concubines. They openly flirted with him and offered to help him transform himself like that girl. His Majesty asked him what he was doing there. The bodyguard was glad that he had finally returned. He started saying something about a letter from Mr. Theron regarding the management of the farmsteads. Then he changed the subject and angrily remarked that Solu had recently looked different from usual when she left the courtyard. He asked why Soldam had acted so frivolously, and then he asked what the master would do if Theron couldn't pull himself together. The blonde raised one eyebrow and asked not to worry. He explained that he had no ulterior motives. He just feels sorry for this poor guy. After all, Solu is the first woman he has become so close to. The king just wanted his friend to enjoy these moments properly. At this time on the lake, the boat was rocking rhythmically on the water surface. Solu was looking at the fry overboard. Hanging over the railing of the boat, she happily watched the fish. She even tried to attract the gentleman to watch. Theron sat motionless on the other side of the boat and looked at the girl. First her legs, then her cleavage, then her pink lips and expressive brown eyes. Sweat appeared on his face. Turning to him, the brunette asked why he was looking at her so intently. The man nervously clenched his fists and replied that he was simply surprised at how unsightly she was. Solu flushed and, with a flash of her eyes, suggested that in that case they should enjoy the scenery. The king turned away and replied that he was just about to. His brain was boiling. He did not understand why he was so stupidly irritated. Then Theron remembered his friend's words about him falling in love with Sola. He asked himself how it happened. At this time, the girl was casually playing with the fish and did not pay any attention to him, as if it wasn't enough that she was afraid of him. His Majesty was worried about whether he had really fallen in love with such a girl. He was also curious about what she was thinking about. He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't immediately hear when Solu called him. The girl worriedly asked if everything was okay with him and what he was thinking about. She also noticed that he had looked gloomy all day yesterday. The brunette asked if he had gone for a walk feeling unwell. Theron turned away abruptly and said that it was none of her business. His hands began to shake, so he squeezed his fist hard to stop the shaking. Solu said that it was not true. Even now his hands were shaking, and she confidently reached out to him. The man answered sharply that he was fine. The girl, not paying attention to his words, pulled back the veil and checked the temperature of his forehead with her palm. She stated that there was no temperature. Then the brunette suggested that perhaps because she was fiddling around in the water, her hand became cold. Solu began to untie the ribbons of her hat and apologized for the inconvenience. The king worriedly asked what she was going to do. The girl took his face in her palms and tried to check the temperature with her lips. Theron reacted with lightning speed. With a wave of his hand, he threw her upward with the help of a magical whirlwind. After flying a little, Solu fell straight into the water. When she emerged, she began to flounder in the water and ask for help. His Majesty turned his back on her and said not to approach him without permission. Henceforth, no closer than 3 steps. Then, after thinking, he added that the girl should keep a distance of 10 steps from him. Continuing to flounder in the water, Solu said she understood everything and asked to be pulled out. With a snap of his fingers, Theron used a magical vortex to pull her out of the water and place her on the bow of the boat. The girl tried to clear her throat. Wiping the water from her face, she asked angrily if he was overdoing it. She was just worried about him. Then she asked more loudly what she had done wrong. The man got angry and said that it was all her fault. She had made him like this. Solu stared at him in surprise, her eyes wide, and asked what he was talking about. The king replied that she was constantly rummaging around in his head, and because of this he could not do anything properly. Therefore, in future, let her not bother him and not approach him anymore. Arriving at the palace, Theron suddenly opened the doors to the room and saw a bodyguard there. He had a strange appearance, a hairpin in his hair and drawings on his face. The guy greeted the gentleman with a welcome back. The king angrily asked what was wrong with his appearance. Fago replied that he had his reasons, and then asked if the lord had had a good time with Solu. Solu opened her eyes and immediately jumped up, not understanding where she was. A familiar voice nearby said that she had a nightmare. The girl looked back and saw her mother and her sleeping sisters nearby. She was very surprised. Then she thought about what was happening. All this was just a dream. Solu rushed to hug her mother, saying what a joy it was. She assumed that her mother might have been surprised to hear that she had become a voluntary victim. Slowly rocking her mother in her arms, the girl kept repeating how much she missed her. The woman was confused by such emotions, but then hugged her daughter back, reassuring her that she had had a very scary dream. Solu couldn't let go of her mother's embrace. She was ashamed that she had lived and eaten peacefully in Haeguk, but her mother tried to calm her down and said that everything was fine. The girl tearfully asked her mother for forgiveness. She saw all this in her delirium. The bodyguard and Soldam were looking after her for the 3rd day of her illness. The king said that for some reason it seemed to him that after being sent to Haeguk, Solu spent more time unconscious than the other way around. Then he added that not only did she have a weak body, but she was also sick. Even though she was given the best medicines, she would not adapt to them right away. Fago asked what it meant that she was not adapting. Soldam explained that the girl was not a mermaid, but a human. You can breathe in Haeguk even though they're underwater. But it's not the same as breathing on land, so she probably hasn't adapted yet. And also, judging by the way Solu calls for her family in her delirium, she is very homesick, although she doesn't show it. It would be great if she could adapt to Haeguk. Soldam placed his palm on her forehead. He thought what a scoundrel Theron was. The girl was in such a state because of him, and he hadn't shown his face for 3 days. Despite the fact that the two of them had different characters, the king still hoped that everything would work out for the couple. Soldam knows very well what kind of life his friend has lived, so he can understand his actions. But he can do nothing about the wounds Solu will receive. The blonde told Fago it was like carrying water in a reshta. He didn't know if they would make it before the end of the year at this rate. A quiet voice asked Mr. Banyu what he would have time for. The man was glad that the girl had come to her senses. Solu said that her whole body was aching. The king became nervous, worried that she had heard something, and he thought that he needed to change the subject immediately. He helped her to get up and said that the girl had been lying there for 3 whole days. They were very worried. Solu was surprised to hear about 3 days. She started apologizing for letting her down with work again. Soldam asked what she was talking about. She was sick. There was no talk of any work. The girl sneezed and said it was her fault. 3 days ago, when Tehran returned to the palace, he said he was tired. Then he explained that circumstances had developed and he returned without Solu. So we need to go and get the girl from the ferry. Fago couldn't believe his ears. He turned to the gentleman, but he had already slammed the door. At this time, the brunette was sitting on the grass near the pier and shivering from the cold. Fago found her in this state. Taking off his shirt, he cursed. He didn't understand what could have happened this time. That the gentleman had left the girl soaking wet and already sick. The guy wrapped the girl in his shirt and asked how she was. Solu was happy to see the bodyguard and, stuttering a little, answered that she was fine. Wrapping her tightly in the cloth, the bodyguard assumed that she was completely frozen. So he quickly headed to the palace. Watching the girl come to, Soldam did not understand how it was possible to leave a person who had fallen into the water unattended for so long. Anyone in her place would have fallen seriously ill. He swallowed nervously and realized that he needed to stand up for Theron now. He ordered himself to pull himself together. As he exchanged fingers on her hand, the king began to say that the master certainly did not do this out of malice. After all, he is prickly on the outside and soft on the inside. Smiling, he asked not to think too badly of him. His Majesty knew that this was not the right thing to say to a girl who had been ill for 3 days. He mentally asked her for forgiveness. Hearing the door open, Solu jumped, thinking it was Mr. Theron. But Fago entered the room right under her nose. He said he didn't know if she had an appetite, but he brought porridge. She needed to eat to gain weight. The girl was surprised when he managed to do it. She didn't even notice him leaving. Soldam stood up and said that since the patient was awake, they would go then. He had a lot of work to do while he was looking after her. Solu promised that she would definitely come to work tomorrow. The blonde smiled and said that if she had a good rest, she could come. The girl cheerfully noted that she had had enough rest until today, and even tried to perform a few steps. The king laughed and said that he would then send her home if she looked ill. After the men left, the room became unusually quiet. Solu picked up a bowl of porridge and sniffed. The milk rice was very fragrant. The food brought back memories of white rice balls, and she closed her eyes in bliss as she remembered. The girl decided that, judging by her growing appetite, she had rested enough for today. But an unexpected pain stabbed her head, so she decided to rest a little more after she ate. Enraged, Soldam threw open the doors to the king's room. Grabbing him by his clothes, he menacingly asked what Theron was doing. Still not letting go of his friend's shirt, the blonde angrily said that it was because of him that Solu got sick, and he hadn't shown up even once in 3 days. It turns out that he doesn't care that she woke up. Tehran calmly said that he understood him and asked to let him go, but Soldam replied that he could not let him go with such an attitude. Then the king of Baikiguk abruptly slapped his hand away, saying, "I said let him go." He frowned and added that it was between him and Solu, and his friend had no reason to be angry with him. Soldam spread his arms wide and asked if he was joking, since he was helping him, since he couldn't do anything right himself. Then he added that he needed to at least apologize for making a mistake or he was going to just die. Theron angrily replied that he was going to die anyway and asked him to leave him alone. Soldam stared at him in surprise. The friend continued that she was the first to ignore his warning. And anyway, she was probably angry with him now. So why would he visit Sola? He's not a doctor. King Cheon-Haeguk almost had a fit. His whole body trembled from exhaustion. He said he was speechless. Then he asked when it all went wrong. The blonde understood that Tehran had previously done as he told him, albeit clumsily. But after that day, his attitude changed in an instant. Soldam wondered if he had made a mistake in dressing up the girl. But he said that his friend was probably confused about himself. The king of Bekhaguk needs to try to figure it out. Then, turning around, the blonde said that he was leaving and let his friend rest. Theron sat down on the sofa, exhausted. He frowned and held his head. The man didn't know what he was feeling. He understood what Soldam was worried about. But was it because he was meeting a woman for the first time or because he was not ready? The king had no idea what to do with her. Theron had no intention of leaving her alone on the boat. Thinking about his feelings, the king called Fago. The door immediately opened and the bodyguard entered. His Majesty asked if he had fed the girl. The boy replied that he had cooked porridge. His Majesty said that since the guest was on the mend, he needed to make sure she ate well. Fago agreed and was about to leave, but the gentleman asked him to stay as he had one more urgent request. Late in the evening, Solu went out for a walk. She sat down on a bench and stretched. The girl looked up at the stars. The medicines were really good and she could feel their effect, as if she hadn't been lying around for 3 days with a cold. She was wondering if everything was okay with Mr. Theron. The girl understood that she had actually acted willfully when she touched him. Resting her head on her hands, the brunette muttered that she was just nervous, and he hadn't told her not to. Tears came to her eyes. She supposed that the gentleman hated her, but still, throwing water at a person who was worried about you was too much. Solu thought he had a beautiful soul, but this is beyond the pale. Wiping away the tears that had welled up, the girl muttered that she had had enough. And then she asked who would need such a beautiful face with such a character. Theron, who had come up from behind at that time, asked who had such a beautiful face. The girl screamed in fear, slightly deafening the gentleman. He noticed that, judging by the way she was singing, she had indeed already recovered. Solu frowned in an offended manner and turned away. She asked what was the matter, and then told him to speak and go away. The man replied that he was just out for a walk. Glancing at him, the brunette asked what kind of walks at night were they, and then she told him to go back, since he himself had told him not to bother him. Then a box with rice balls in it clicked open in front of her. The man offered to try some. Solu immediately started drooling and said that of course she wanted to try it. Theron noted that if she didn't want to or didn't like it, let her say so. The girl almost wagged her tail with delight and anticipation. She said that she had wanted to eat them for a long time. After trying one ball, the brunette moaned with pleasure and said that it simply melted in her mouth. When Fago brought her porridge today, it reminded her of rice balls. Watching Solu eat the delicacy, the king was confused. This girl was strange. Sometimes she was pouting. Sometimes she was smiling as if nothing had happened. Noticing the crumbs around her mouth, Theron reached out to brush them away from her face. The girl flinched and jumped back. Then she bowed and asked for forgiveness. The king was puzzled and asked what she was apologizing for. The girl replied that he had told her not to come closer than 10 steps to him. He is constantly angry with her for not listening. Solu said that she was so carried away by the balloons that she completely forgot about them. Smiling, she added that tomorrow she would do everything as he ordered, so he shouldn't worry. The man asked if she was sure it was 10 steps. Solu asked again. The king explained that she was 2 inches from the pot, so it was far for her, not 10 steps. She took a step forward. The king asked her to come closer. Solu timidly took another step. Theron said that more was needed. When she was almost next to him, then he noticed that these were her 10 steps. The girl chuckled and asked where 10 steps were. The king replied that given her height, it was somewhere around that. Solu raised her hands angrily and said in an offended tone that she was not that short. The king grinned and suggested that the brunette console herself with this thought if it would make her feel better. A few days later, Theron was flying to the headquarters of the farmsteads. Before he could land, Solu ran out to meet him. The man told her not to run so she wouldn't fall. The girl asked her not to worry. The king feeds her so well and even meets her from work. She cannot keep him waiting, since he is already kind to her. His Majesty replied that he will only meet her until she recovers. The king remarked that the wind was cold so they should hurry back. Solu agreed. Soldam watched from afar as his friend helped the girl up onto the saddle. He smiled as he noticed that Theron had suddenly become so concerned about the brunette. Plus, he also asked him how Solu was doing. And on top of that, he secretly escorted her, dressed as God knows who. Even the girl became more open thanks to his care. So Soldam hoped that if this continued, Theron would be able to live a life. He watched with excitement as the pair sat down on the saddle and smiled at each other. Xian flapped his wings and they rose into the air. Balancing between the clouds, Solu couldn't stop admiring the scenery of Haeguk. Suddenly, a flock of crane-like birds flew past. The girl's mouth dropped open in surprise. She asked the gentleman if there were any birds in the country. The king said that they called them seabirds, but usually they fly only during the day, so it is strange to see them late at night. Perhaps they are in a hurry somewhere. This moment made His Majesty very wary. The hilt of his sword began to glow. As the man had expected, trouble was coming. He tore the veil from his face and drew his sword. Solu wondered what had happened. And then she noticed the octopus monster ahead. Theron handed her the sword. The girl was dumbfounded. She had never held a sword in her life, much less fought. The king said that he had already realized last time that the monster always comes back stronger. He didn't know how much more powerful he had become now, but he certainly appeared pumped up. And he gives her the sword just in case, not necessarily to fight. The octopus did not hesitate and immediately released attacking spikes. Theron began to dodge them on the snake. Then he used magic, deflecting the flying needles. He quickly asked if Solu was okay, and the girl confirmed that she was and advised him to concentrate on the battle. The monster began to attack again. The king deflected the spikes, but one of them still pierced Chan's front paw. Theron bent down to check the wound. He remembered that with the snake Fago it was the same. Therefore, he assumed that the monster had learned to attack the sea serpents in their vulnerable area. The octopus crept up unnoticed and managed to grab Sola with one of its tentacles. With a roar, it pulled her out of the saddle. The girl screamed. The king screamed at him to let her go now. He tried to bring her back with magic, but the monster pierced the girl with spikes. A few drops of her blood fell on Theron's face. All he could do was shout her name loudly, and Yoncho heard it as she flew past in the distance. She immediately rushed to help. Having flown to the place of the skirmish, the red-haired girl wrapped a whip around and tightened the tentacle of the monster holding Sola. The octopus released its prey as soon as the lasso was pulled tightly around the limb. The girl fell right into Theron's arms, unconscious and covered in blood. The king asked Yoncho how she knew. The warrior replied that she was nearby on patrol. Besides, the royal family always senses when relatives are in danger. Noticing how the king was hugging the brunette, the red-haired girl realized that Solu was Theron's girlfriend, not Fago. The man carefully held the brunette, offering her to lean on him. His Majesty promised to heal her wounds. After a quick examination of the girl, he noticed that fortunately, her vital organs were not affected. She was breathing, but her wounds were deeper than they seemed at first glance. So it was necessary to hurry. The king shook her gently and asked her not to lose consciousness. The monster, having come to its senses, released its spikes again. Yoncho deflected them with a blow of her whip. The girl realized that her attacks had become useless against the octopus. She angrily shouted, "Where the hell are everyone else?" Surely everyone sensed that Tehran was in danger. A voice nearby apologized for being late. It was Hajj, the king of Jaheguk, who had arrived. He was a handsome young man with the body of a warrior, short brown hair and a scar at the corner of his lips. Tehran asked why he was taking so long. Shaitan apologized again. Yoncho remarked how could he be late in such a critical situation. Hajj asked what his brother was hugging. He replied that he had no time to explain. The girl's wounds were too deep. He apologized and said he was leaving this monster on them. As the king of Chahaguka drew his bowstring, he noticed that the monster had few legs and smelled strange. He doubted whether he would be able to defeat it. The octopus began attacking with its spikes again. Haji fired several magic arrows that destroyed the spikes, and one of them hit the monster. Theron quickly flew to the palace, leaving the battlefield for his relatives. The wounded monster also decided to leave the scene of the skirmish. Yoncho called her brother a chatterbox. She said he shoots like a god but acts modest. Then she added that he is definitely good at that, but she was a little upset that the monster had managed to escape again. Kaji asked his sister if she knew who that girl was. The red-haired girl asked warily why he suddenly became interested. Shaitan replied that he wasn't exactly interested, but that such a confused Theron couldn't help but intrigue him. At this time in the castle, Fago was sorting through the scrolls. He was remembering Sola. This morning he had suggested that she not strain herself and rest for another day. The girl replied that she was fine. She decided to go to work anyway. If she felt bad later, she would come back. The brunette was worried that a 3-day vacation might show her in an unfavorable light. Then the bodyguard offered to walk this stubborn girl. The girl was happy and insisted on going quickly. Walking behind Solu, the boy saw a small fish clinging to her hem. He didn't like it. Fago believed that no matter how tired one was of swimming, everyone should do their own work. So he leaned over to unhook the impudent girl, but he accidentally pulled her skirt. The girl stopped, looked back, and asked what had happened. The bodyguard froze in awkwardness. He wondered what kind of fish this was. Fish in Haeguk don't disappear so quickly. His recollections were interrupted by the door quickly opening. Mr. Theron ran into the room with a bloody Solo in his arms. Fago rushed to him asking what had happened. The king only muttered that her wounds needed to be healed. Then he explained that it was all the work of that monster. The bodyguard clarified that she was with him. His Majesty reminded that the boy himself knew about his abilities. Now even he alone could not cope with him. Carrying the girl to the bed, Theron ordered the royal physician to be brought in. The bodyguard even turned around and asked again. The king barked sharply at him to hurry up. The boy, already running away, said that he obeyed. His Majesty looked at the wounded girl with great regret. He believed that this happened because he had an urge to meet her. If they had walked instead of flying on the Cheon, then they would not have encountered this monster. Theron laid the girl on the bed. She was breathing heavily. Blood was oozing from her wounds and dripping onto the floor. The man became worried. He was in such a hurry to save her that he couldn't even stop the bleeding properly. He carefully brushed her hair back and opened her blouse. Then he took off his top shirt and pressed it against the wound on his chest. Solu exhaled heavily. The king's face was covered in sweat from worry. He was nervous that Fago was gone for so long. Continuing to press on the wound, His Majesty realized that she had lost a lot of blood. Therefore, if she delayed with the treatment, something irreparable could happen. The door swung open. The king looked back and saw that the doctors had arrived. They quickly headed towards the patient. The royal physician examined the girl and said that judging by her condition, the wound was quite deep. In addition to large through-and-through wounds, there are also lighter puncture wounds that should not be ignored either. His Majesty said that enough explanations let them hurry with the treatment. The doctor began to treat the wounds. Some were stitched, others were simply bandaged. The king nervously tapped his fingers on his hand the whole time, standing to the side. Fago suggested that he go and change his clothes. Theron replied that he would do it later. The bodyguard thought that the gentleman was not like himself. Firstly, he called not an ordinary doctor, but a royal one. Secondly, before, at the slightest stain on his clothes, he would immediately go and change. But now he stands there imperturbably, covered in blood from head to toe. The guy was interested in the question of how the situation had turned so much. The fact that the gentleman was so worried about Sola would only ruin everything. Fago, raising his voice slightly, said that the doctor knew his business. His Majesty needed to change his clothes and calm down. Theron just waved it off. Then he glanced sideways at the guy and angrily said that he would do it later. The bodyguard swallowed nervously and clenched his jaw. The doctor applied the last bandage and put away his instruments. The king came closer and asked if they were finished. The doctor said yes, but it would take some time for the wounds to heal completely. He gave her some good medicine, so the patient would gradually get better. Then the doctor added that he would like to send a decoction for better recovery. After a slight hesitation, he asked whether he should send it to the bedroom. Theron thought for a second and then replied that they should send it here for now. His Majesty called out to the doctors heading for the exit. He asked if he needed to state the obvious. Everything seen and heard in the palace is confidential. The doctor bowed and replied that this was absolutely true. When the door closed behind the doctors, the king staggered from nervous tension, leaned against a column and exhaled. He asked the bodyguard to watch Solu for a while. He would catch his breath, wash off the blood and return. Heading towards the exit, Theron stopped and turned around, approaching the girl. She was lying unconscious, bandaged. His Majesty drew the canopy over the bed, hiding the brunette from prying eyes. Then, as he walked, he turned to Fago and told him to forget about his request. Let him leave the room and watch from the outside. As she walked down the corridor, Theron thought that the doctor should have examined her wounds, but there was no need for Fago to look at the naked Sola. Having removed his dirty clothes, His Majesty plunged into the bath. The hot water with rose petals instantly relaxed the man. The king didn't understand why he was so tired. It seemed like the fight hadn't been that long. Solu, covered in blood, immediately appeared before his eyes. His thoughts were interrupted by a servant who came to tell him that guests had arrived. The man asked again in surprise. The servant confirmed that Mr. Soldam had arrived, and with him were Mr. Banyu and Mrs. Yansho. Theron clutched his head wearily. He told the servant not to continue and to tell the guests to wait. The servant replied that the guests would wait in the bedroom. The man rose abruptly from the water indignantly and asked if they had already gone to the bedroom. The servant replied that they still had to go. His Majesty quickly came out of the pool and ordered that he be immediately helped to get dressed. As Tehran moved quickly through the corridors, he thought that normally they would have waited in the office. But as expected, it was because of Solu. The closed canopy won't hold back the overly curious Yancho. You don't even need to go to a fortune teller here. If they found out he had a woman in his bedroom, they would probably cause him more headaches. Besides, the girl wasn't dressed properly due to her injury. His Majesty entered the room just as Yancho had already grabbed the canopy, intending to look inside. Theron's eyes widened in horror. He ordered a stop and quickly rushed to the bed. Approaching the red-haired girl, he asked what she was doing. The girl smiled slyly and greeted him. She thought that this guy was definitely hiding something. Yancho said that there was constant moaning coming from the bed. Then she asked if it was the woman he was with. Squinting her eyes, she noticed that this girl might be the one who would give him her heart. Still not taking her hand off the canopy, the red-haired girl tried to look inside once more. But Theron grabbed the curtain and sharply ordered her to leave it. Yancho's eyes widened in surprise at first, and then she laughed. She remarked that it was great that he was so honest. The girl asked if that was why he was so protective of her. The man frowned, came closer and said that he had enough of this nonsense. Hajj put his hand on his shoulder. He said that his brother was overreacting. They were not strangers to each other and he was hurting them. Yancho agreed and added that he was scary. Brown-haired touched Tehran's hair and noticed that he was in such a hurry that he ran like a wet chicken. The king of Bakhaguk pushed Hajj's hand away from his hair and said, "Don't drag it out, but tell me what business they came for." The brown-haired man was surprised by his question. Not only did he, who turned up his nose at women, hug the girl, but he also ran away, scared to death from a small wound. Tehran winced at the word petty. He was indignant. Hajj chuckled and noticed that it was dark and he hadn't seen. The king of Bakhaguk said that he would explain everything and offered to follow him. It is not worth having such conversations in front of the wounded. He led the guests out of the room. Soldam quietly asked if he was telling the truth. Tehran reminded him that he had seen Yancho's curiosity. Even if he remained silent, they already knew about Solu. If he doesn't tell them everything and shut their mouths, then the number of gossips in each palace will be 5 times greater. Even though Tehran kept the servants and doctors silent, Bakhaguk's ministers would still know everything. So before they start making up rumors and making things up, it's safest to just tell it like it is and keep them quiet. If Solu suddenly finds out that the king's goal is to win her heart, she will hate the man like his mother. There's almost no time left before he goes crazy, so we have to be extremely careful. Soldam agreed with him, but he thought he was being sincere with Solu. Then he asked if his friend hadn't said before that this wouldn't happen. Theron remembered the girl's smile and clenched his fist. After calming his emotions a little, he replied that he was just worried about his heart. Soldam said that he understood everything. Even if all the people of Haguk knew the truth, they would try to avoid rumors as much as possible, at least until the day they take Solu's soul. Theron glared at his friend, then turned around and headed for the exit. He ordered Fago, who was standing outside the door, to look after the wounded woman while he was away. The young people settled down in the living room, where tea and dessert were set out on a small table. The king of Bakhaguk was excited and did not know how to begin. The guests asked to stop creating tension and start telling who this woman is. Yancho was the first to lose her temper. She rose abruptly from her chair. Slapping her palms on the table, the girl asked how they met. Theron calmly replied that he opened his eyes and she was there. The red-haired woman froze in confusion at first, and then asked what he was talking about. Yancho asked him to explain what he meant, and immediately asked how his body was, since he used to have an attack near women. King Pekaguka rolled his eyes. He said he knew it would happen, that's why he kept quiet. The warrior asked angrily, "How come?" Theron slammed his cup down on the table wearily. He said he would tell them everything if they promised him something. The guests were surprised. The king continued. He asked them to swear that they would not tell anyone about this. Yancho was indignant. She asked if His Majesty really thought that if he shut them up, rumors would not spread. Judging by the fact that all of the stranger's wounds were treated, the doctors had already seen everything. Theron replied that this was the doctor's concern, and they needed to watch their tongues. The girl impatiently shouted that it was not a problem. Let him tell her quickly. The king of Bakhigun looked at the others and asked if they would take the oath. Kaje scratched his head in embarrassment and replied that he had no one to talk to. And Banyu hardly talks at all. Since they had agreed, Theron continued. Everything was as he said. He was sleeping and Solu suddenly appeared. Hyuncho angrily shouted that he had promised to tell everything if they swear. The man wearily replied that that was all. When he opened his eyes in the morning, she was lying in his arms. At first, the king thought that the servants had brought her in by force, as usual. But the girl seemed to have no idea what was going on either. Solu explained that she had jumped into the sea and ended up in Haeguk. Hachia clarified that since she jumped into the sea, it meant she was not a mermaid. The king confirmed that she was a person from the land. If the girl was not lying, of course. Well, even though she was a woman was a woman, so Theron wanted to drive her away. But it turned out that his body did not react to her at all. The brown-haired man asked if that was why he had decided to take her heart. The king, nervously twisting his cup, replied that it was. But he was still working on it. And that's the main reason why they should watch what they say. Because if she finds out, all his work will go to waste. Hyuncha was surprised that he was working on it. She asked, so there is a woman who hasn't fallen in love with his appearance. Although he is, of course, selfish, capricious, terribly stubborn and does everything his own way. But with such an appearance, this can be forgiven. Since the girl didn't fall for it, it means she has high standards. Yonkyo then thoughtfully asked if maybe it wasn't about standards. Soldam jokingly asked for a truce and asked to praise Theranv at least once. The girl was indignant, noticing that he had nothing but appearance. Haji relaxed in his chair. After hearing this story, he became curious about what kind of woman Solu was. Hyuncho noticed that when she peeked behind the canopy unnoticed, the girl seemed cute to her. Turning to Soldam, the red-haired woman asked what happened to him, because he was crazy about women. The warrior suggested that perhaps he did not pay attention to Sola because she was his friend's girlfriend. The blonde took a sip of tea and calmly replied that he simply knew about the circumstances. At the same time, he kept an eye on her during the day in the courtyard. Hyuncha was outraged that Tehran was making such a little girl work. Soldam explained that during the day in Baekhaegung, servants go back and forth on business, so she is in the courtyard from morning to evening. Theron loudly put his cup down on the table and said that it was enough. Since they were all gathered together, there was something they needed to discuss. The king said that he would talk about today's monster. At first, he thought it was one of the mutated octopuses that occasionally appeared, but each time he becomes stronger and appears more often. Therefore, His Majesty believes that someone is specially honing his skills. Hyuncho thought about it and agreed. She remembered that on the night of consolidation it was a piece of cake. Until recently, they themselves had no trouble holding him. But judging by the way they restrained him today, she doesn't know what will happen next. The girl thoughtfully bit her finger and suggested that this monster could be Hamu. Soldam countered by saying that Himu was a god from legends. There was no need for him to attack Haeguk, who he had created himself. The warrior noted that nothing was known about Himu. They did not know who he was, a man or a monster in reality. Theron replied that they didn't care about the monster's true nature. What mattered was that it attacked them. He then asked if there had been similar encounters with the monster in the countries where the red-haired one had been. Hyuncho replied that no one had heard of such a monster. The king cursed. If he couldn't deal with it, Seolu might be in danger again. The girl added that apparently the octopus had not appeared anywhere except in Baekhaegung. Otherwise, it would have been noticed. It turns out that no one knows anything about the monster for sure. The only thing known is its disgusting appearance and habits. But it is completely unknown why it becomes stronger and how to deal with it. Theron muttered thoughtfully that if he had known it would be like this, he wouldn't have been so merciful to him when he was weak. Then he added that it looked like they wouldn't come to anything today. So he suggested thinking it over carefully and then getting together again. Banyu noted that in the end there would be no measures against the monster. Therefore, he would go and let them continue their conversation. The brunette stood up from his chair and was about to leave when Hyuncho grabbed him by the clothes. She asked him to stay because she had just had a good idea. 2 hours earlier, Hyuncho was working on documents in her office at the main building of Hwanghaegun. After signing the last paper, she stretching the muscles of her stiff body. Her body ached from clearing up piles of pending work all day, and she thought wistfully of a little fight to warm up. A great idea came to mind, to make a circle around Baekhaegung. As she rose from the table, she accidentally dropped the hair comb. She fell with a bang. Hyuncho bent down to pick her up and realized that her lower back was also hurting. Holding the hairpin in her hand, she remembered her recent conversation with her brother the king. The girl told him that she had taken over the affairs of state and the management of the farmstead, which Pi-han should have been handling. The brother felt sorry that his only sister was getting it, even though the king said he would get to the bottom of the truth. He then asked if she still wanted him to get along with Haeguk and Pi-han. Yeonsho, holding the hairpin to her chest, mentally asked Pi-han where he had gone. She trusted only him, got married, and came to Haeguk. While he is wandering somewhere, she has to deal with the country's affairs that are not suitable for her. The girl misses him very much. But at this point, everyone was curious about what option she would offer, which is what Theron inquired about. The red-haired one explained. In her country there is one very unusual fish. Even in the huge Yeongguk there are only a few of them. So these fish can even be considered a national treasure. Very few people know about its existence. Yeonsho knew that her brother wouldn't be happy about this information being revealed in Haeguk. This small fish remembers everything it hears and reproduces it. Soldam said that this is the first time he has heard of such a thing. The girl reminded him that she had already said that it was a very rare creature, and she added that the blonde didn't know all the fish in Haeguk either. He just chuckled in response. Yeonsho continued, "This fish has amazingly strong jaws. That's why it grabs onto its object and hangs until it lets go. While the fish holds itself like this, it completely absorbs surrounding sounds and alerts its owner." Theron suggested that she was suggesting finding the fish and attaching it to the octopus. The girl confirmed that. That was how they would find out who was behind it. The king of Baekguk thoughtfully wondered how they would find her. It was unlikely that they would simply give away one such specimen in Yeongguk. Yeonsho said that she would find her without her brother knowing, since he himself would never give her up. Theron suggested that they meet again as soon as the warrior got some fish. Most of the guests left the palace. Only Soldam remained. He told his friend to leave it to them and to take care of Solu. Winning the girl's heart was more important to him. Turning around with the intention of leaving, the blonde suggested that he rest, as the day had been hard. Watching his friend leave, Tehran supported his words. Indeed, for him, the heart is a priority. Therefore, we must not give in to emotions for Sola as we did today. We must take care of her outwardly, but nothing more. He needs to get it into his head that only by getting her soul can he change the course of his destiny. Approaching the canopy in the bedroom, the king decided that he would first send her to himself as soon as he woke up. He paused for a second and exhaled loudly before opening the curtain. Solu was still unconscious. His Majesty adjusted the brunette's head on the pillow, as it had slid down due to fidgeting. At that moment, the girl opened her eyes. Theron jerked his hand away. Solu asked where she was. The king only hoped that she had not been conscious all this time. He told her that these were his chambers. The brunette asked again why she was in his chambers. The man asked if she remembered anything. He brought her here to heal her wounds from the monster. The girl smiled and noticed that he had saved her again. His Majesty reached out to her with his hand and froze. He said that she had been given a decoction. Removing his hand, he explained that because of the decoction she might feel good at the moment, but later the pain would return. So he will give her the rest of the medicine. Solu should take it. Theron clenched his fist and said that since she woke up she should go back to her place. The girl replied that it was fine, but it was difficult for her to move now, so she would need help. The king turned and said as he left that Fago would help her. As he left the room, Theron cursed and bit his lip. 10 days later, Solu was breathing fresh air in the courtyard outside her bedroom. She was sitting on a bench and swinging her legs. Suddenly, a small goldfish rubbed against her cheek. The girl was happy to see her little friend. She named him Honorable after stroking the fish. Solu said that they wouldn't be able to play today. Her wounds have already healed and she must go to work in the yard. The fish again rubbed itself against the girl's face, making her laugh. Han made funny pirouettes, inviting him to play. The brunette suggested that he have fun with his friends. Smiling at the funny fish, Solu said that she thought Mr. Tehran was just bad at expressing his feelings. When he kicked her out of the bedroom, she even thought he was very angry. But he always made sure she ate well. He gave her bitter medicine so that she would recover faster. He even gave her gifts. The girl spread her arms out to the sides and showed Han the new dress from the gentleman. Solu jumped up from the bench, joyfully pressing her hands to her chest. The girl said that a weight had been lifted from her soul. After all, she thought that she was hated again. Waving goodbye to the fish, the brunette said that she would go and work hard. After taking a few steps, Solu heard someone asking her if she was going to work again today. The girl jumped in surprise. Looking around, she saw Mr. Theron. The brunette wondered how he always approached so silently. Her soul sank into her heels from fear. The king noticed that it seemed she had already recovered. Smiling, the girl said of course. After all, he had taken such good care of her. She was glad to see him again. Solu spun around, showing off the new dress and jewelry he had given her. Beaming, she asked if the outfit suited her. Theron just turned his head away silently. The girl asked where he was going, but the king just continued to walk slowly. She then suggested that he was going to see her off, to which the king asked if she had no objection. Solu happily said that how could she be against it? She was all for it. She felt light in her body, although she had not yet fully recovered. Perhaps it was because she took good medicine every day. Looking at the king, the girl decided that she needed to forget about her ill will. Theron looked magnificent in his masculine beauty. The brunette involuntarily looked at him. Noticing her close attention, His Majesty asked if he had something on his face. Solu was embarrassed and replied that he was so handsome. That's why she was staring. The man noticed that it was unexpected. The brunette said that he should be extremely grateful to his parents. His Majesty asked why, to which the girl replied that he was much more beautiful than her, although she was a girl. Therefore, he should be grateful that he was born so beautiful. Tehran wondered if his mother had ever considered him her child. The only thing he had received from his parents was an all-consuming loneliness. These thoughts brought sadness to his face. Seeing his sadness, Solu decided that he did not have a very good relationship with his parents. The girl turned to him, and when he looked at her, Solu bowed and apologized. She said that it seemed she had blurted out something again without thinking. Turning around and continuing his walk, His Majesty replied that he understood. The brunette remained perplexed and asked him to tell her. The man asked what exactly. The girl asked him to tell about himself. Theron's stomach clenched again. Seeing the gentleman press his hand to his chest, Solu asked if he was okay. Until now, His Majesty had only been approached by his appearance, but no one had yet wanted to know him specifically. But the king answered the brunette that there was nothing wrong with him. The girl noticed that he looked even worse. She suggested that he take a rest and added that she would get to the courtyard on her own. Turning around, she grabbed her head, scolding herself. Suddenly, the gentleman grabbed her hand and asked where she was going during the conversation. Solu was surprised and began to mumble that she was going to the courtyard. Still holding her hand, the king angrily remarked that she had just asked to be told about him. Then he asked if she had changed her mind. The girl exclaimed that of course she did, but the king heard a conversation in the distance. Looking back, he saw figures approaching. His Majesty remembered that there was to be a meeting this morning. He realized that he had almost caught the eye of the ministers from Solu. He knew he had to keep it a secret for as long as possible, so Tehran told the girl he would tell her about himself later, and now she had to go quickly to the courtyard. The girl was surprised and assumed that he had not intended to tell anything. The king replied that he had urgent business in the morning, and patting her on the shoulder, he tried to send her to the courtyard. At the same time, he said that there was no time to cool off. The brunette tried to protest. Theron noticed the ministers approaching. He cursed her for not listening at all today. The man promised that when she returned in the evening, he would tell her everything. And having said that it was enough chatter, he practically pushed her out. When Solu entered the headquarters of the farmsteads, she thought that she was interested in learning about Mr. Rana. She decided to choose only acceptable questions to ask him that evening. But when she entered the hall, she saw Mr. Soldom's chief assistant at the reception. Coming closer, she said hello. The girl asked if she could help with anything. Solu smiled and asked permission to sit there and work too. Kahi was surprised. She noticed that according to Mr. Solu, she works in the office. The brunette confirmed, but added that there are some difficulties with the work there. Not everything can be learned about visitors by observing them from above. The assistant replied that the decision on this issue was not within her competence. Therefore, she recommended that this be agreed upon with Mr. Soldam. Solu said that of course she was going to get permission, at least from the master for the bathhouse if Master Soldam was not there. But she also thinks that she should ask permission from the staff here. Kahi was surprised to hear Banyu's name. At this time, the worker was called by her co-worker. The girl replied that she would be there in a second. Turning to Sol, she asked if she could sit quietly, as if she wasn't there. The brunette confirmed. She said she would get permission and come back. Leaving the reception, the girl was happy that everything was being resolved quickly today. When she first arrived, everyone was staring at her, so it was hard to approach them. But now it seems like they are no longer suspicious of her. Perhaps Solu was tired of being a member of the team. Entering another door, the girl finally found Soldam. She was glad to see him. The blonde smiled sweetly and asked how she was feeling. Then he said that she could have rested a bit more. There was no need to leave so early. The brunette replied that she was already completely fine. She would not be able to calmly look Mr. Soldam in the eye after this. The king smiled sheepishly and confirmed that there was such a thing. Then he thought about what he could really tell her already. He didn't understand why Solu had fallen for those rumors about him. Noticing that he was hesitating, the girl asked if something was bothering him. The blonde man, clenching his fists, said that he had something to confess to her. A little nervously, the king began to say that in fact he... But then the door swung open and Yoncho walked in, addressing Soldam. She started to say something about that fish, but then the guest saw Sola. Pushing the king aside, the warrior began to squeeze the brunette's cheeks, saying how cute she was. Then she asked her name. Stuttering a little from such pressure, the girl introduced herself to Sol. The princess noticed that she had a cute name too. She then said that her name was Yoncho, and reminded him that they had met before. Noticing the bandages, she assumed that the girl had not fully recovered yet. Solu thanked her for her concern and asked her to let go, as she was not very comfortable like that. Finally letting go of her cheeks, Yoncho asked how Soldam treated her, whether he offended her. The girl answered that the gentleman treated her well, so good that she even felt ashamed. The princess confirmed that he always treated girls well, and warned her to be careful. The brunette asked again. Yoncho made a gesture with her hands like a cat with its claws, and said that he would bite her and eat her. Solu was very surprised and asked again if Mr. Soldam really eats people. The princess said no, he swallows women. The brunette sat down at the news that the gentleman swallowed people. Yoncho laughed and said that it was a joke. Of course he couldn't eat people. Still recovering from such a joke, Solu replied that it scared her. Stroking the brunette's hair, Her Highness noticed that the girl was very naive. Then she asked if she liked Soldam. The girl asked in surprise if the gentleman was here. Yoncho replied that there was no one else here except the two of them and Soldam. Solu said, pointing at the blonde man, that this was Mr. Banyu. The princess began to laugh. She asked when Banyu changed his hair color. The blonde tried to explain to Sola, but she mumbled something and counted on her fingers. The girl kept repeating that the one she knew was not Mr. Banyu, but Mr. Soldam. Then Mr. Soldam is Mr. Banyu, and Mr. Banyu... Her brain began to boil. Yoncho slapped the king on the back of the head and asked him what he had told her. Then she pinched his arm and asked him why he had done this to Banyu. If the real Banyu knew about this, he would be stunned. Soldam was confused. He was thinking about saying that Banyu was his nickname. Solu asked if it was true that he had given a different name. The blonde confirmed it and apologized. The girl asked why he had lied. The man replied that he had no intention of lying and apologized again. He asked Solu if she remembered their first meeting. He felt like she had some prejudices about him, so he lied somehow without realizing it. If she had known his real name then, they would not have been able to become such friends as they are now. Soldam was so upset that tears came to his eyes. The girl touched his hand and told him that he did not have to blame himself so much. Of course it's wrong that he lied, but she knows he didn't mean it. The girl was sure that even if she had known who he was from the very beginning, she would still have become friends with him. She smiled brightly. The way he was with her was different from the rumors. Whatever the case, he was a sensitive and kind person. Solu added that he would be more honest in the future. Soldam covered his face with his hands in shame and said yes. Here Yoncho intervened in the conversation. After listening to them, she became curious about what kind of rumors these were, since His Majesty hid his identity. The brunette replied that nothing special, only that he loves women and that he is dishonest. Then Solu realized that she had said those words to the king's face. She felt ashamed, so she bowed and asked for forgiveness. His Majesty was surprised and asked why all of a sudden. He was the one who lied, so why was she asking for forgiveness? The girl replied that she felt that this lie was because of her words. She was ashamed that not knowing the gentleman, she had made a conclusion based on rumors. She was very sorry and asked to forget about her mistake. Soldam was confused and repeated that everything was fine. Yoncho thought about how kind the girl was. She wondered why she was apologizing for telling the truth. Solu replied sheepishly that she felt she had offended the master. Bowing again, she said that she would then go to work. Soldam said that her workplace was here. The girl replied that it was difficult to see the visitors from here, so she wanted to work downstairs. Of course, if he allows it. The blonde took her hand gently and said that if the reason was anxiety because of him, Then there was no need to work downstairs. Solu smiled and said that it had nothing to do with him. She just wanted to do the job properly. The man agreed, but made her promise that if things got tough or if any difficulties arose, she would tell him right away. The girl promised and put up her folded fingers. Soldam was surprised at first and then did the same. Solu left, wishing Yeoncho a good journey. After the brunette left, the princess glanced sideways at the man and said that he was acting strangely. He asked what she meant. The princess responded with caution and asked if he really liked the girl. Solu was drawing pictures at the desk near the reception. She was still replaying the previous conversation in her head. The girl remembered her mother's words and grabbed her head. Mother said that a person should be modest. The brunette closed her eyes and thought about how she would now look Mr. Soldam in the face. Someone nearby said that it was the first time they had seen this child. Solu looked up and saw a mysterious blonde man in bright clothes and holding a fan. He tapped his folded fan on his other hand and asked if she was new. The girl answered hesitantly that she was. The man looked at her intently and noticed that he was seeing her for the first time. Looking at him carefully, Solu tried to figure out who it was. Kahi noticed that the brunette was talking to someone, so she quickly headed towards them. The assistant approached Mr. Kumjak and apologized, saying that this girl was not responsible for receiving guests. Solu suddenly jumped up in surprise. She apologized, bowed, and stated her name. The girl didn't even think that he was a guest. Kahi explained that this worker had just started working, so she was tactless. The man replied that everything was fine, it happens. Turning to another employee, the assistant asked to show the guest to the rooms. As he left, the blonde glanced at Sala again and noted that he liked seeing a new face. Touching a lock of her dark hair, he said that they would see each other. Solu was left wondering why he was touching her hair. When the guest left, Kahi told the brunette that this place was the face of the farmstead. So if she was going to work here, she would have to be more collected in the future. Then she asked if the girl understood what she meant. Solu became upset and promised to be more attentive. She thought about the guest. She had a feeling that he was somewhat similar to Mr. Theron. Solu asked who this man was. Kahi explained that he often stayed at Baekhagen's compound. Mr. Gyumjak is a merchant from Changkuk, and it is said that there is no place where his foot has not set foot. He is very rich. Then new guests came to the reception whom Kahi greeted. One of them introduced herself as Beksa from Yangguk. The employees went to show her the room. A couple of hours later, Solu felt the wounds on her arms and shoulders. They ached badly. Gathering the scribbled papers into one pile, the girl muttered that because of work she hadn't even been able to have lunch. Kumjak approached and noticed that she had not eaten yet. The girl smiled and explained that she had been busy with work but needed to eat. The man smiled sweetly, hiding behind his fan. Solu asked if he had any business. The blonde said that he wanted her to service him. The girl was surprised. Kahi came to her rescue. She explained that Solsu does not do maintenance. Kumjak asked again in surprise. The worker replied that this girl had another job. When he returns to his room, she will send another girl to him who will take good care of him. The man smiled and said he didn't know about it. Kahi bowed and asked for forgiveness. The blonde, fanning himself in the evening, replied that everything was fine. He was wrong, because without finding out anything, he was very pushy. The guest turned and left. Solu turned to the assistant. She asked if she should go to the master since he had called her. After all, he was an important guest. Kahi replied that maintenance is not done by just anyone. It is the hardest job in the farmstead. She then placed the bundle on the girl's desk. The assistant said that she had brought her something to eat since she had not been able to have lunch. Opening the box from the bundle, Solu was overjoyed to find the licorice tea eok in it. Kahi looked at the girl thoughtfully. She didn't know what Soldam was thinking, but he told her not to give her any other work than the one he had assigned. And he told her to keep it a secret from the girl. Later in the evening, the assistant praised the brunette for her good work today. She said that she could go home and rest. Solu objected and said that she could work some more, since guests arriving at night were also important. But Kahi replied that she had heard that she had health problems. She did not need extra worries if the girl fainted from unnecessary zeal. Solu smiled. The assistant said that she could come tomorrow and finish everything, but now she should get ready to go home quickly. The brunette slowly climbed the steps. She was incredibly tired. The girl wanted to say goodbye to Soldam and go to rest. Her eyes were drooping from fatigue, so she didn't see that she had bumped into someone. When she opened her eyes, Solu saw that it was Mr. Gyumjak. She apologized, and the man smiled and noticed that they had met again. He asked if she was okay. Solu greeted him. Bowing slightly, she wished the guest a good time, and turning around, she wanted to leave. But the man called out to her. The girl turned to him and asked what he wanted. Kumjak suddenly leaned close, pressing her against the railing, and said that he needed to say something. Still hovering over Solu, he asked if she had any urgent matters to attend to. The girl with frightened eyes replied that she was going to say goodbye to Mr. Soldum before leaving. The man chuckled thoughtfully. Hanging over the railing, the brunette said that she would fall, and she noted that she could hear the gentleman well, so it was not necessary to come so close. The blonde took a step back. He apologized and said that he was afraid of losing her, so he didn't notice how it happened. Then he asked if, since she was not currently a farm worker, she could help him. Solu asked if he was talking about maintenance, as Miss Kahi said it was not a job she could do on a whim. The man replied that that was not what he was asking for, so she need not worry. The girl thought about it. She was a little worried about the assistant, but it might be a trivial request. Geumjak, with a feigned thoughtfulness, tapped his fingers on his hand. He began to talk about the courtyard of the Bakhaegung Palace. It suits him in all aspects, be it the hospitality or the atmosphere. But there is one thing that still upsets him. The brunette asked what exactly was upsetting him. The man tried to find the words. Then he rubbed his eyes tiredly and replied that he always came alone, so his meals were always in silence. Salu agreed that other guests came with several companions, so the blonde asked if she could eat with him. The girl stared at him. Kyumjak clarified that he was only asking to join him at the table once, so there was no need to worry too much. Of course, if she doesn't want to, she can refuse. The brunette wondered if it would be okay to eat with him. After all, it doesn't even apply to service. She was inclined to think that they could go together. Besides, she didn't want to upset the important guest. Solu said she agreed, but she had a request in return. The man asked what it was. The brunette asked if she could say goodbye to Mr. Soldam first. She should inform that she has finished work, and also ask if it is possible to have lunch with the guest at the workplace. Kyumjak asked if she hadn't just said she had finished work. The girl confirmed it. The man replied that he was not asking her as a guest then. He specified that he was inviting her as his friend to dinner. If she was going to put herself out there because he was a guest, he would rather be turned down. Solu hesitated and didn't know what to answer. The blonde watched her reaction sideways. He staggered and clutched his head, saying that he hadn't eaten anything since morning and that he felt dizzy from hunger. The girl was horrified. The man said he was busy with business. She sympathetically noted that one should not skip meals. Kumchak smiled and asked if this meant that she would go with him. Solu thought it was not service but simply an invitation to dinner. She accepted with a smile. When they entered the dining room, the brunette's eyes widened at the abundance of dishes on the table. She froze. The blonde touched her shoulder and asked why she was standing there like a pillar and not passing by. He pulled out a chair and invited her to sit down. The girl sat down carefully. She thought with delight that the gentleman even pulled out a chair for her. This made her feel like a noble lady. Sitting down next to him, the blonde looked at the dishes on offer with interest. Having chosen one, he suggested that Solu try it. The brunette wondered if all high-ranking people did this while eating. Maybe she should do it too. Kyumjak, smiling, asked her to try it quickly. Solu carefully picked up a piece with her chopsticks and put it in her mouth. She was delighted. The man asked her if it was tasty. The brunette confirmed it was, but she thought it would be tastier with rice. Immediately before her eyes appeared a plate of rice, which the gentleman presented to her. He said that if she needed anything, she should say so. Solu thanked him and suggested that he start eating too. After all, he said that he hadn't been able to eat anything since the morning. Putting down her chopsticks shyly, the brunette apologized. Everything looked so delicious that she didn't even notice. The blonde interrupted her, saying that everything was fine. He was fine and she could eat first. Solu wanted to object, but the man added that seeing how she enjoyed her food, he himself was full and didn't even think about food. The girl was indignant. Where had she ever seen such a thing that she ate and he was full? She felt uncomfortable that she was the only one eating. If he didn't eat, then she wouldn't either. Jumjak said that it was enough for him that she had come, but he gave in and would eat too. He began to carefully examine the dishes, choosing what to try. Trying different dishes. The girl thought that the food was undoubtedly varied and tasty, but it seemed to have become boring. The blonde man rested his chin on his fist thoughtfully. He asked her name. The girl confirmed that her name was Solu. Looking at her, Kumjak said he thought he knew what she needed right now. Then he asked her how she felt about alcohol. The brunette was surprised. The man asked if she had never drunk. Solu answered that, to be honest, never. Kim said that when he first saw her, he thought she was a very good drinker. The girl was surprised how it could be understood by looking at the face. The blonde replied that there was a way that everyone knew. She touched her face, trying to feel what was written on it, but she only felt her cheeks. The gentleman suggested a shot to set the mood. When he sipped the drink, the girl caught its sweet scent. Pouring alcohol into glasses, Kumchak asked not to refuse. Having given the girl a glass, the man suggested clinking glasses. Raising his glass, he looked slyly at the girl and proposed a toast to Solu's heart. The brunette was surprised by such a toast and asked why it was for her heart. The gentleman, after a little hesitation, replied that he meant for her health. Solu smiled and said that although she sometimes fainted, her heart was strong, so he shouldn't worry. The man replied that he understood, and he offered her a drink since the longer alcohol sits in the shot, the worse it tastes. The girl took a sip and her eyes opened. The drink was not bitter at all. The sweet smell of chavan flowers was felt in her mouth. She finished her shot and realized it was intoxicating. Maybe she was a real drunk. Solu hung there for a few minutes, then beamed. Smiling radiantly, she called the gentleman her own older brother. The blonde smiled and said that now there was no need to call him sir. The girl was horrified and said that she couldn't do that. Kumjak said that everything was fine. It really bothered him when people addressed him as sir. He leaned towards her and added that if she called him guest or sir next time, he would get angry. From now on, she should call him brother Gyumjak. Stuttering a little, the brunette called him brother. The man smiled and said he liked it. Then he poured her another shot. At this point, Soldam put down the last scroll. He leaned his head wearily. There was a lot of work to do, as he hadn't been able to concentrate on his work for several days. Looking out the window, he saw that it was already dark. He thought about Solu and wondered if she was still working that late. As he left the office, he thought that she couldn't just leave, so he needed to ask Kaka. Arriving at the reception, he asked the assistant if Solu had left. The girl replied that she had let her go a long time ago. Soldam was surprised that she hadn't come in, so he asked if Kahi had seen her leave. He hoped she hadn't fainted again. The girl replied that she had seen her going up to him to say goodbye. This seemed strange, since there was only one entrance door to the courtyard. So Soldam wondered where she had gone. He told his assistant that he would go and look for her, and if she saw her, she should let him know right away. The blonde went to search, asking the staff along the way if anyone had seen the brunette. Kahi was worried about where Solu had gone. She hoped that nothing had happened to her. Suddenly, someone nearby noticed that she was working hard until late. The girl raised her head and saw Mr. Kumjak. In Baekhaegung Palace, Tehran paced the garden from side to side, looking into the distance, thinking that Solu should have returned by now. He was worried about why she was late. Running his fingers through his hair, the king lamented that he had made a meaningless promise that morning. His Majesty did not know what she could tell her that was worthy of her. In the distance, he saw a vague silhouette. As he approached, the king saw Gyumjak, who was carrying Solu in his arms. Tehran frowned, not understanding what this meant. The girl, with flushed cheeks, peacefully laid her head on the man's shoulder. Coming closer, the blonde greeted him and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. His Majesty asked what Gyumjak was doing in the Baekhaegung Palace. The guest looked at the girl affectionately and replied that he was here because of Solu. The king frowned even more. He knew that the blonde often used the farmstead, but he did not understand why this puppy was taking care of the brunette. Maybe the girl fainted in front of him. Then what is Soldam doing there anyway? He was also interested in the question of how Gyumjak knew that she lived in the palace. The blonde asked how long His Majesty had been waiting. Theron was indignant. Who was waiting for whom? The man replied that His Majesty looked as if he was waiting for someone. Then he asked if Tehran Ran knew where the brunette lived. Gyumjak explained that she had had a bit too much to drink, and he wanted to put her to bed. He noticed that the girl had a lot of fun with him during dinner. The king asked what he was talking about. The guest passing by him said that he would tell him about it gradually, and added that if he did not object, then Solu would spend that night in his arms. Gyumjak is more powerful than other kings and has a huge fortune. Among the mermaids born and raised in the sea, there is no one who does not know him. Tehran had met him several times for cultural exchanges with Haeguk. There was something in his smile that made him feel uncomfortable. The blonde asked again where Solu's room was. The king replied that he didn't need to know. He could just give him the girl and that's it. Gyumjak insisted that he was the one who wanted to put the girl to bed. His Majesty told him to forget about it. He reminded that without an official agreement, A foreigner cannot enter the Baeki Palace, even if he has status, and the guest knows it very well. The blonde clenched his jaws and handed Sola over to the king. Theron turned around and warned him not to do such a thing again. The palace was only for official business. In other cases, outsiders are forbidden to even climb this hill. Entering the door, the king added that if Kumjak had come to rest in the courtyard, then let him walk there. And the door immediately closed behind him. The blonde remained in front of the closed door. His body was shaking slightly and his face was covered in sweat. He exhaled loudly and involuntarily touched his throat. Kumjak realized that if he took another step, his head would be separated from his body. As the king carried Solu through Baekhaegung's courtyard, he thought that he could not leave it like this. Tehran hugged the girl and regretted that she had returned in Gyumjak's arms and not in someone else's, and she also drank alcohol. It was lucky that the rich man brought her to the palace right away. If there had been other intentions, His Majesty shook Sola, calling for her to wake up. She did not respond, so he shook her harder and raised his voice. The brunette mumbled something. Theron sat her down on the platform and sat down next to her. The girl swayed from side to side. The king shook her shoulder again, ordering her to wake up immediately. He asked if she understood what she was doing. Solu pushed his hand away and told him not to shake her. Then she leaned over and began sniffling again. The king cursed and asked if she was going to wake up. The girl mumbled that she had just dozed off. His Majesty said that if she did not wake up right now, he would beat her hard. Solu raised her head and shouted why he did this. Then, focusing, she happily recognized Mr. Theron. He noticed that he had sent her to work in the courtyard, and she was drinking alcohol there. The brunette turned away and said that it was strange. The king asked what exactly. The girl replied that he treats her well only when he is in a good mood. And if he is in a bad mood, he calls her a girl and does everything his own way. Then she turned sharply and, pointing her finger at the king, said that he was bad. Theron grabbed his head and replied that he understood. She was drunk, that's why she was acting like that. Solu did not calm down and called His Majesty a capricious great devil king. The man frowned. Then he slapped her and ordered her to repeat. The girl began calling him a capricious great man again. But Theron covered her mouth with his hand and ordered her to stop. He promised that he would not insult her again. Tears appeared in Solu's eyes. She said that she was in pain and started crying. His Majesty was surprised. He hadn't hit her hard enough. What could possibly hurt her? Then he spat on all of this, deciding that if he continued to listen to this girl's drunken nonsense, he would get sick from stress. But then Solu suddenly grabbed his face with her palms and happily announced that she had caught it. Continuing to squeeze his cheeks, she called him handsome. She began to irritate him, so his hands began to release a magical vortex. But remembering what happened at the lake, he clenched his fist. Solu continued to feel his face, asking how he could be so beautiful. The king wearily allowed her to do whatever she wanted. He noted that if next time she came drunk again, he would immediately throw her out of here. But he didn't manage to finish speaking, because the girl came close to him and kissed him. Tehran froze in surprise. Solu pulled away, still holding his face in her hands. Before he could even think about what had just happened, she kissed him again. His Majesty instantly blushed. Then he started feeling a little nauseous and dizzy. He assumed it was the alcohol that was left on the girl's lips. He had never gotten drunk before, no matter how strong the alcohol. Solu began to laugh and call him Sweet Neroni. She asked him if he had missed her all this time. Then she went to hug him, saying that they did this every day. The brunette hugged His Majesty and laid her head on his chest. She called him Neroni again and said that she missed him very much. Then she fell silent. Theron shuddered, wondering who this Neroni was and what they did every day. The man grabbed Sola by the shoulders and shook her, telling her to wake up. He shouted who Neronius was, and the girl didn't react to him at all. He picked her up and decided to forget about it. Since she was talking nonsense anyway, there was no need to worry. In any case, he could ask tomorrow. Carrying her to the room, he still couldn't get out of his head what kind of guy this Neuron was. Solu woke up from someone calling her. Not immediately realizing what had happened, she opened the door. Seeing Fago, the girl said hello. The guy asked how much she drank yesterday. The brunette, stuttering a little, answered that she didn't know. She drank as much as the guest gave her, and after a certain moment, her memories were erased. Then she asked what had happened. If she had to go to the courtyard, she wasn't quite ready yet. The bodyguard asked if she remembered what she did with Mr. Uranus yesterday. Solu was horrified and asked if she had done anything wrong to him. Fago said he didn't know the details. I only heard that she lost consciousness and something happened. The girl thought with fear about what she had done yesterday. She only recalled up to the moment when she started drinking. After that, she couldn't remember anything. The brunette asked if Theron was very angry. Fago just chuckled and grimaced. Solu didn't understand such a reaction. She decided that he must be very angry. The bodyguard said that she had better go to him and apologize. The girl was surprised at first, and then decided that she needed to apologize to the gentleman quickly. So she immediately headed towards him. But Fago managed to grab her hand. He suggested that she first eat and change. Solu asked if there was time for that. The guy said that the gentleman was in the washroom now. He asked if she was going to go straight there with her apologies. The girl scratched her head in confusion. She hoped that she had done something frivolous and would not be kicked out. After getting herself in order, after some time Solu looked for the master. She hoped that everything would go well. The brunette thought that she had no choice but to immediately fall to her knees and pray. Finding the gentleman in the gazebo, she bowed and greeted him. Then she asked if he had slept well. Theron was reading something and didn't pay attention to the girl. Solu bowed again and apologized for yesterday. The man glanced at her and noticed that the girl looked exhausted. He told her to come closer. The brunette was shaking all over. His Majesty handed her a cup and said that this medicine would ease her headache and improve her general condition. She needs to drink this. Solu gulped the liquid down. The king asked indifferently what she was apologizing for. Perhaps for slapping him on the cheek. The girl choked in surprise and started coughing. The man assumed that it meant not for that. The brunette grabbed her head, wondering what kind of person she was that she could screw up so badly. She didn't know what to do. She even considered letting him hit her. She bowed low and said she was very ashamed. His Majesty asked if she thought she could express her apology in words for touching his royal body. Solu replied that of course not, so she offered to hit her in the face too. Theron turned away and replied that he had no need to engage in such uncultured things. He then added that it wasn't just a punch in the face. She had done something even more rude. The girl's eyes opened in horror and beads of sweat appeared on her face. A bunch of imaginary scenes flashed before her. She couldn't even imagine what could be more terrible than hitting the gentleman in the face. Solu stood with her head down. His Majesty, scratching his chin, said that she was repeating some unfamiliar male name. The brunette was very surprised and thought about the names she knew. She asked that perhaps she called Don Sam. Tehran said irritably that he had not. The girl said the name Chaehyun. The king shook his head. Then the girl suggested that maybe Dokkan. The man said no. He thought about how indecent she was. After all, he thought that there were no men around her because of her unattractive appearance. But she continued to name names one after another. At this time, Solu was thinking that if it wasn't the neighbor Dong Sam or the younger brothers Chaehyun and Do-hong, then she didn't know who it was. Due to her illness, she stayed at home all the time and was not particularly close to anyone. Then she suggested that perhaps she had called Fago or Soldum, and she added that if not, then only the three names she had said before remained. The king said Nuon's name. Solu thought for a moment and replied that she had never heard of it before. The man concluded that she did not remember. Tehran said that looking at her, it seemed like she had forgotten absolutely everything about yesterday. The brunette bowed and apologized again. She said that since her actions had angered him, then her face. But the king interrupted her, saying that he did not want to. The girl was surprised. She understood that it hurt, but she would feel better if he forgave her by hitting her on the cheek. His Majesty lowered his head and replied that nothing came to mind at the moment, so he suggested leaving it. The brunette asked again. The man clarified that she would wait until he came up with a punishment for her. Theron said he was still angry, but for now she could go. She would get punished later. Solu said she understood and turned around to go. But the king stopped her and warned her that if she drank again, she would not get off so easily. Then he asked if she had told Kumjak about her place of residence. Solu thought for a moment and replied that she honestly didn't remember. Tehran asked her to refrain from telling him where she lived. The king understood that rumors would start anyway, but it was better that no one saw her bragging about it. The girl replied that she understood. When she came to the courtyard, Soldam grabbed her cheeks and pulled. The brunette begged him to let go. The blonde, propping his hands on his side, sternly asked how she could just leave yesterday without saying goodbye. Moreover, she went to have dinner and even drink with the guest, without telling either him or Kaka. Solu clutched her throbbing cheeks. She apologized to the gentleman and said that he was an important guest and it was impossible to refuse. Next time the girl will definitely inform in advance. Soldam said that there is no need to inform in advance. She is not obliged to fulfill personal requests of guests, especially outside working hours. The brunette replied that if the guest was not completely satisfied, she would go to another courtyard. The king glared at her angrily. Solu turned around and said she was going to work. She promised to come back when she was done. Unexpectedly, Soldam hugged her from behind and pressed her to himself. The girl was surprised. The blonde, pressing his head against hers, said that he was very worried. He clarified that he was not saying this because of the guests of the courtyard, but because her safety was very important. Soldam said that yesterday he walked around the yard for a long time, but no one even saw her shadow. That's why he was very scared. He even asked Fago, but he replied that no one had ever returned to the palace and added that he only knew what had happened. Solu sobbed. She thought that she had only been working for a short time, and yet the master was so worried about her. He was very sensitive. The brunette smiled and thanked him for his concern. She promised that she would never leave without saying goodbye again. His Majesty asked if she really promised. The girl looked at him, confirmed it, and asked him to let her go. Soldam smiled and asked why she was looking around like that. Perhaps she had done something wrong. Solu, trying to free herself, replied that it was nothing. It was just that someone might see. The blonde let the girl go, saying that he understood, and pushing her a little, he sent her off to work. Looking after her, the man thought that such greed was indecent. A little later, Kahi also scolded the girl. She said that if a guest came with a personal request, she should immediately inform her or the master. Solu should greet guests well, but not be the first to ask questions. Then a new guest came in and the assistant went to meet him. She added that they would talk later. The brunette sat down at her workplace. She thought about how Kahi and the gentleman were worried about her. The girl realized that she had acted too irresponsibly yesterday and regretted it. A shadow loomed over the table and asked if she had arrived safely yesterday. Solu, recognizing the voice, jumped up. The girl answered Mr. Kumjak that everything was fine, and then she wondered if she had really offended him as well. So, looking down, the brunette said that she had drunk a lot yesterday and was not herself. Since she was drunk, she does not really remember what happened. Then Solu asked if she had done something wrong to him. The blonde, hiding behind his fan, replied that yesterday. No, but today. Yes. Solu was surprised. The gentleman, giggling, replied that she had promised to call him brother yesterday. The girl was shocked that she had called the guest by name. And also an older brother. After all, she only has younger ones. It's somehow awkward. Kumjak added that the excuse that she was drunk and doesn't remember is not accepted. Solu froze. Nothing came into her head. Yesterday went well, but today something... The brunette didn't even have time to finish her thought before she was swayed and fainted. Kumchak managed to catch her at the last moment. Holding the girl in his arms, the blonde did not know what to do. At first he thought that he should take her to the palace like yesterday. Then he decided to wait for Kaka. Minute after minute passed, but the assistant was still not there. Only the workers glanced in their direction. Having lost his patience, Kumchak noticed that it seemed like the administrator would not come. It was impossible to let the patient lie on the cold floor like that. Having picked up the girl, the blonde carried her out of the reception. One of the workers noted that it was necessary to simply pull the cord in order for Mrs. Kahi to come. Kumjak carried the brunette through the corridors of the courtyard to his room. As soon as he grabbed the door handle, his hand was intercepted by Soldam. Leaning against the slope, the king hoped that this situation was just a misunderstanding. Jumjak bowed slightly and said hello. He said he was disappointed that His Majesty thought of him as such a person. He had nothing to suspect him of. Soldam replied that this girl works here and she has her own duties. Whatever his intentions, a guest cannot pick up an unconscious employee and carry him to his room. Then he added that Higuk's compound was intended for overnight stays, not for service. And the king did not want any rumors to be spread about it. Kyumjak smiled and replied that Solu had lost consciousness and he just wanted to take her to another place. His Majesty narrowed his eyes. He thought that recently this rich man had begun to come to the courtyard more often. Due to his social status, Soldam had been watching him all this time but hadn't noticed anything odd. But something still made him wary. The king asked if he had any personal interests. Gyumjak looked at his interlocutor in confusion and then laughed. He asked if it really seemed that way. The king thought he wasn't even denying it, but he suggested out loud that they stop before things went too far. The rich man asked why. Soldam replied that she already had a lover. The guest asked if it was Mr. Theron. His Majesty replied that he was free to think as he wished. Kumjak thought and said. Not only did Tehran not allow women to be around him, he also only allowed men to stay in the palace. And now there is a woman living there. So it is obvious. The rich man noted smugly. Soldam replied that he could take his words as meaning that even knowing that the enemy was Tehran, he still would not give up. Kumjak thought he had made a mistake. He had just wanted to see Soldam's confused expression, but it seemed he had gone too far. So putting on a feigned cheerful expression, he replied that he could not be an opponent to Mr. Theron. Then His Majesty offered to give him Sola and put an end to all this. The man, of course, agreed. Soldam noticed that the guest was called the rich man Changuka, so he must be smart and clever, and he believes that this conversation will remain between them. Taking Sola into his arms, His Majesty added that he also asked that the fact that the girl was living in Bekigun's palace be kept a secret. The king turned around, preparing to leave. The blonde noted that if the master himself asked for it, then of course he would listen to him. He narrowed his eyes and thought that he had just received confirmation that Solu was the one who would give Tehran's heart. He called out to Soldam and asked what if Solu's heart chose him instead of Lord Theron, and he asked if he could try in that case. His Majesty replied that he did not know. He had no time to talk about what would not happen. He turned and walked away from the guest. While carrying the girl, Soldam thought that this rich man would not recklessly talk about falling in love with a Solo. He heard that he was calculating in everything. In trade, politics, and even in interpersonal relationships. If the rumors are true, then it means he won't be able to go against Mr. Theron. But these words and actions, saying that he will make Sola his own, are no different from a declaration of war. After Solu came to her senses, Kahi told her to go down to the kitchen. She needed to find out what food each guest preferred. The brunette went to the kitchen to meet the workers first. Her headache still hadn't gone away. She hadn't seen all the guests yet, and the thought of having to remember each of their food preferences terrified her. As she approached the kitchen, the girl caught the smell of food. The aromas made her mouth water. Approaching the door, she quietly looked through the crack. Then the door suddenly swung open and the angry woman asked why she was peeping.